remember what my podcast looks like.
It's a really sad line from the movie.
Yeah.
Thank God we started out that way.
Look, I mean, I was like, oh, you know, it feels like any line of dialogue is going to be said. Maybe I should do the tagline instead. The tagline is, to survive in a world at war, he must find a greater strength than all the events that surround him. I'd say also a bummer.
I mean,
You just try not to think so much. Surely there's a
That's a good line. Maybe I feel like I've always struggled
also, do you want to bust out a Malkovich?
with Malkovich's. I feel like we have not covered a lot of Malkovich. Our main Malkovich talk episode was Portrait of a Lady, which we're like, that's a
can't beat
weird
this Portrait of a
application of
Lady.
Malkovich and
Great
doesn't
movie.
unbalance the movie in a way. I was less into the movie, but more into his performance, whereas I feel like you liked the movie a little more and
Portrait
felt
of a
his
Lady.
performance was working a little against it.
He is. Look, casting John Malkovich is an aggressive thing to do.
Repeat your
Oh,
line.
yeah.
You had your
It
great
really
line in
always
that
is.
episode.
Oh, I don't remember it. You have to tell me.
He's sun-dried tomatoes on a sandwich.
That's what it is. I really agree with that. And it's like, if you put 5 of those on a sandwich, you're eating a sun-dried tomato sandwich. Doesn't matter what else is on that thing.
Now, let's forefront this. I think this is like a perfect
This
application
is
of Malkovich.
obviously a great way to use John Malkovich as an American Fagin.
It's
essentially.
arguably one of his best performances, but it's almost inarguably one of the smartest ways a movie has employed him.
Bill, go away. And I don't know your Malkovich take. I don't know where you are on Malkovich. You can speak.
Malkovich in this movie.
In this movie,
I
but also
love Malkovich. I love Malkovich.
Yeah, same.
Yes,
And
general
Malkovich has shown up in some of my favorite movies of all time.
What are some of your favorite movies of all time featuring John Malkovich? Well, I mean, he's in The Sheltering Sky. I bet you like
Sheltering
that
Sky,
one. You love your
big,
Bernardo.
Big fan of the Sheltering Sky.
Secretariat, one of your favorite movies.
I feel like he's
In the Line of Fire,
Well, he's,
one of the greatest action films
Sure.
of all time.
but that's
One of the coolest Oscar nominations.
In
of
the
all time,
Line of
too.
Fire is someone making you a ham and cheese sandwich and then like putting one sun-dried tomato on it in 1992 or whenever it is, 3. And you're like, what's this flavor?
It's bold.
Because like otherwise that movie is like pretty straight down the middle and really well done. And Malkovich is like, this is a new kind of villain. I feel like this is spicy.
But that's almost like putting sun-dried tomato flavored potato chips on a sandwich.
Okay, Bilge, what was
Sorry.
your response? No, I like that take.
Right?
Well, the other thing about In the Line of Fire is it's so much Clint.
He's
It's
good
such
though.
Clint. Like it's
It's
no.
so-
I
it's
mean,
very Clint.
it's great. I mean, that's I believe the same year as
It's-
Unforgiven.
It's the year after Unforgiven.
It's year after Unforgiven, but like when Unforgiven wins the Oscars.
Correct.
I believe.
It's the summer of
that's
93.
And
the year.
Unforgiven obviously has one of those like infamously long modern box office
Releases,
runs.
right.
Where it's in theaters for basically a straight
But
year.
In the Line of Fire is the same vibe of like Clint being like, should I hang it up? Should I do 30 more years?
Right.
I
I mean,
yeah.
everyone has said this, but it just is always interesting to talk about. I know we're nestling like conversation topic and conversation
No,
topic
go for
here. It is incredible that late period Clint Eastwood is going on 40 years now. That the demarcation point of when you're like, and Clint starts doing his like wind down sunset movies is like in its 4th decade.
It's
almost
hilarious.
Yes.
I mean, and you read the reviews of those films at the time, and not just those, but like the later ones. I mean, I'm a big fan of True Crime and,
True Crime
The
is good.
Absolute Power.
well, no,
and-
I don't love
they
True
do
Crime.
blend
I
together.
love Blood Work. I
Blood
think
Work
that
is interesting. Yep.
one of the best pre-Mystic River, O. Clinton, O'Toole again movies.
You also love having blood work done. You text me and you're just like, I'm riding
They're
high.
taking 6 vials
Yeah.
today. True Crime, I remember being kind of overwrought. That's the death penalty one.
That's the death penalty one. It has it completely shits the bed at the very end. Like
Yes, it does.
The climax is just like we got to finish the
Is that
movie, guys.
Linney
you
and
know?
Daniels?
Sorry, who?
Laura Linney and Jeff Daniels? Am I right?
I'm going to look it up because I think Laura Linney for sure. Have you seen
Laura Linney is in Absolute Power. Right?
That's
okay.
Well, all right. Which
Okay.
is the one that
Playing his
Daniels
daughter?
is in?
right.
Yes.
That's right.
Gene Hackman is the
The president
of the
who's
United
getting his
States.
dick sucked and
Good
and
casting.
Clint Eastwood is a cat burglar,
Yeah.
which is my favorite part of that movie. But True Crime is the one where
Daniels is in Blood Work,
huge,
right.
yeah, Daniels is
Sorry.
really good in Blood Work.
Yeah.
True Crime is the one where a major subplot is that Clint Eastwood, who's a newspaper reporter, I think, cucked Dennis Leary and cannot shut up about it. And when Dennis Leary's like, can I assign you a story? And Clint's like, sorry for fucking your wife. And it's like, Leary's like, I'm just trying to assign you
That specifically should be a plot point in 2 movies a year.
Well, which one has James Woods in it?
James Woods is in True Crime.
In True Crime, yes.
I cannot remember. He might be either the good guy lawyer or the bad guy lawyer.
It's been a while, but
Anyway,
these
Malkovich is none of
movies
these
I'm
movies.
allegedly a fan of, and I can't remember who's in them. But But if you read the reviews at the time, and I remember the reviews were all kind of like, harping on Clint's age and the fact that he's casting himself as, he's not really a romantic lead in those movies, but there is, you sense that, and it makes perfect sense that they said this, and it's kind of like, man, if he only looked like that.
Right,
now,
he's virile as hell in The Line of Fire or whatever.
But it's the same thing of like looking at stills of Crystal Skull now. And
Right,
you're like, this movie has jokes about him being old.
yeah.
And like same with like Rocky 5.
Wait.
Like, yeah.
What are some other Malkoviches you love? Because I was obsessed with Malkovich as a young person because of being John Malkovich, right? And like that movie, I knew him from like Con Air and Rounders or whatever, but like that movie is introducing Malkovich as like the prepackaged, like this is the most interesting character actor, right?
Well, this
of
is
a generation.
This is another one of them. Empire of the Sun.
Right, which I didn't see until much later.
Is it crazy for me to say? I had this thought while I'd seen it before while rewatching it just now. I had the thought, like, if this movie were better received, I think he would have won the Oscar. I know he didn't even get nominated, but it feels like Malkovich has been nominated.
Oh, he was nominated for In the Line of Fire.
Yes.
I think that's the only one.
Places in the Heart? He has 2 nominations.
Does he have 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I take it back.
He was not nominated for
Places in the Heart was like his breakout, right? That was, yes, and he was nominated for
and that was a movie where a lot of people just didn't know who the hell he was.
Well, I think
Right,
it's
that's
basically his first movie.
Who is
Right.
this guy performance? And this coming after that, right? And it's like on paper, this is a role that almost feels designed to win someone an Oscar. And he is so good in it. And it's like, is it a little too early in his career combined with people being a little tepid on this movie? But watching it now, and we'll get into who beat him, I was like, it's kind of extraordinary he didn't get nominated, let alone win.
Wasn't it Connery who beat him? Was it Connery?
Is this the fucking...
I think the Untouchables year.
Is that true?
I could be wrong.
Look it up, David.
Wait, which year, sorry? Who won Best Supporting Actor?
Yeah, is this the Connery?
87.
John Connery.
Yeah.
Okay, so then no one was going to fucking beat Connery.
87 was a big year for my cinephilia. And, in terms of like the Oscars, Last Emperor is one of my all-time favorite
This
movies.
is I was about to bring up.
Okay.
What I consider your favorite movie of all time. Am I wrong?
Last Emperor?
Or at least like the movie that sparked your cinephilia you've seen a billion times.
I've seen it a billion times.
Yeah.
I've seen it a billion times.
And for you, that's you've seen it even by Bilge's standards a lot.
There was a period in
You say a
1987.
Bilge's dozen is a billion.
There was a period in 1987 when I was, and 1988 too, early months of 1988, when like alternating every week between going to see Empire of the Sun in the movie theater and
whatever
Last
the new-
Emperor.
Oh,
the movie theater.
wow.
It was
You're
in
so
DC.
insane.
They were playing in the 2 nicest theaters. Last Emperor was at the Uptown, which is an enormous fucking screen. It's where I think 2001 had its world premiere, maybe. And then Empire of the Sun was screening at this place called, at the time, I think it was just called the Cineplex Odeon Cinema, or maybe the KB. It might have been a KB Cinema. But again, these like single screen, old school picture houses. And after school, I would just every week or, every other day, it was kind of like, well, what should I see today?
Yeah. Empire or Emperor.
Yeah. And of course, they were both shot in China. So
I love how deep we are getting into multiple areas right off the bat. I do want to just quickly say, this is Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David.
It's a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion products they want. Sometimes those checks clear and sometimes they bounce. Baby, this is a mini-series on the first half of Steven Spielberg's career, repaying the balance of a thing we started 7 years ago. It is called Podrasic Cast. Today we're talking about Empire of the Sun, one of his kind of infamous bounces.
I wouldn't call this a bounce, but definitely a not the success maybe he
Poorly
hoped for.
received at the time. And I remember, look, we mourn the death of the old Box Office Mojo interface and features very often on the show. A thing I used to love to do was how easy their drop down was to be able to adjust for inflation in various different ways in any year. And I remember at some point, probably in the late 2000s, being like, if you adjust to modern dollars, how many Spielberg movies don't make 100 million? And I was surprised by how many of the films that are considered flops would have made 100 today. And in my memory, the only ones that wouldn't have made 100 were this, Always, and Sugarland. That 1941 would make 100 million in today's dollars or whatever. This is off of a memory, a thing I cannot source.
well, there is.
It didn't lose money.
It
but-
was coolly received. I mean, I remember this. had kind of an initial wave of appreciation because the National Board of Review gave it Best Picture and Best Director.
Which is often a weird kind of death knell of like them
Can
being
be.
early. They call it. People go like, does that mean it's a serious front runner? And then the thing like Peters, like I think of like Burton getting the Sweeney Todd Best Director award and people being like, holy shit, Burton's a player. And then you're like, wipe out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing. I mean, and I don't remember if the film had even opened by the time it won that award. Because obviously Spielberg at this point is, I mean, as far as box office goes, he's God, right? He's coming off, a number of Oscar nominations and things like that. There is this anticipation that he's eventually going to make something that wins. And I think Empire of the Sun initially looks like the kind of film that could be that movie.
Absolutely.
Right. Because Color Purple, I mean, I'm sure you guys have gone over all this stuff, but like Color Purple, gets all these nominations. He doesn't get nominated, even though he wins the DGA.
Right. It is this weird, and we should say our guest today is Bilge Ebiri, the great Bilge Ebiri, returning to the show, New York Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And is this now Bilge's induction into the Five Timers Club, finally having been on this podcast the average number of times he watches a movie that he hates? The low end. The fewest times he ever watches any movie.
This is your 5th episode.
Hell yeah.
Dunkirk, Black Hat, Lorenzo Zoil, Ferrari, and now Empire of the Sun.
I feel like these are all very like important. You've never been on a passive movie for you.
Yeah, you guys don't ask me for anything that I'm
they're all like your major guys, your favorite work by one of those guys or both.
My guys. These are very much my guys.
Your guys.
My guys. But what was it? We were talking about
the Color Purple thing. Right. Because it's like Color Purple is a big success at the box office, but it gets a ton of nominations. He is snubbed, and then it is historically up until that point in time, the most nominations without a single win. And this weird balance that we've been charting of like Jaws gets Best Picture nomination, doesn't get director. Close Encounters gets director, but not picture. Raiders is the first time it gets both. He's basically always only winning technical awards for his movies.
Yes,
and then it's
seen
like
as a great technician,
right?
And he wins the Thalberg at some point, sometime around now.
That's
this point.
true. As kind of a like the again.
Thank you for the business.
An insult from the Spielberg to Spielberg,
right. And he almost drops it. I remember he almost dropped it on the podium.
But Color Purple was like the first movie of his where they sort of did like it's nominated in every category. Basically, we're treating it like a legitimate Best Picture contender, except for you.
Yeah. Except for you, Steven Spielberg.
Right,
I clearly had nothing to do with the
every
quality
time they
of the
were
film.
sort of going like, not yet, hold your horses.
He won the Thalberg the year after Color Purple and the year before this.
Right. So because I remember that felt like kind of a consolation prize in a way. And there was this general vibe that somehow the Oscars didn't like Steven Spielberg. I mean, you know how these like memes take over. It's funny now because now there's this vibe that like any Spielberg film will like get an Oscar nomination. At least in the 90s, early 2000s, there was definitely that vibe.
But even now, it feels like they take him for granted a little bit. Where you like the Golden
only
Globes,
one film of his has ever won Best Picture.
Yeah, and the Golden Globes.
That is crazy.
The year of the Post. Seth Meyers comes out at the beginning and says like. The Post, a film Steven Spielberg made about the importance of journalism against presidential crime, starring Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep. And then they have an actor come out holding like 40 awards. And he goes, not yet. We can't give them all the awards yet. And then that movie blanks.
Yeah.
It doesn't win a single
by the way,
globe.
I just rewatched it again. That movie rules.
That movie does rule.
I love it.
I'm a huge fan of it. But I do feel like the reaction at the time was the reaction that he usually gets now. Kind of the reaction that John Williams gets. I watched that Disney documentary about John Williams where it's like, oh, he's so good and he's got all his Oscars on a shelf. And it's like, he hasn't won an Oscar since 1993 because the Academy's always just like, yeah, you did a good job again. Fine.
I mean, he did win a ton.
He won a bunch.
Yeah.
But like the thing was like Williams won Oscars for, Fiddler on the Roof, like a bit of an odd early Oscar where it's like adaptation of a song score. But then it's like Jaws, E.T., Jaws, Star Wars, E.T., Schindler's List. Where it's like he won for big iconic scores. He should have won for Catch Me If You Can. That's a miss. Like there's a couple other scores where like I think at that point they were just like, well, we don't want to give it to him again.
Well, I mean, when Munich was coming out, there was this Time magazine cover announcing that film, which he had made on such a quick turnaround. Like started filming it after War of the Worlds came out, already had it done by December. And he openly says in that, I kind of want the third best director trophy. Like he openly admits, like I'm jealous
I
of
never
like
saw
sort
that,
of like Hawks and Ford and the guys who have gotten more than 2 and being in that realm. And it feels like him saying that outwardly made the Academy go like, if you want a third one, you really have to fucking prove it to us. And Munich that year was like seen as the early front runner and then became like a picture director also ran.
Munich is too alienating.
Same thing with
Yeah.
Lincoln though.
And
like
I remember
a year out, people were like, well, he's going to win his
Lincoln
third.
is
He
the
should have won
weirdest.
for
No,
Lincoln.
he should have won
I
for
loved Lincoln. And I was very
Lincoln's a
mixed on
masterpiece.
Munich when it first came out. I've come to appreciate it more, but it does feel like they shot the first draft of the script for me with Munich. Lincoln is extraordinary. Lincoln is wonderful. And I was really surprised that Lincoln got so little.
But
I was
because
surprised,
it felt too obvious for them, I think.
was-
They're like,
yeah.
really? We're going to give it to the sort of homework movie?
There's sort of
Even
like-
though I
it did
disagree
get
with
Oscar
that.
nominations.
It did,
I was
it did.
surprised that like it got so little run in like the critics awards and things
Yes.
like that. That was
Yes.
my first year voting in
At the Critics Circle?
Yeah, that was my first year voting in New York Film Critics Circle, and there were almost no votes for Lincoln
Well,
in Best Picture.
Lincoln, right. Daniel Day-Lewis won Best Actor. And that was the year Zero Dark 30 won. Now, I wasn't a member then, but I feel like that's a movie that came on very late. And just like American Hustle
People
the
had
year
just
after,
seen it,
which
yeah.
we, in my opinion, shamefully gave Best Picture.
I know what you're talking
Oh, I
about. That
was-
movie's
I-
aged perfectly.
Were you there for American? I have a good American Hustle New York Film Critics Circle win story for you, which I
On
can't
micro-
share.
okay,
I
okay,
cannot
okay.
share on microphone. We'll
But
do
like
this
those,
afterwards.
like 2 years in a row, the Critics Circle went for kind of the last movie to screen, right? Like the movie that came in right at the end, being
Recency
like, get our
bias.
attention.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it worked.
Yeah.
A strategy that I feel like doesn't really work anymore.
It does not work anymore. They tried it with. I mean, it's so funny because we're always thinking, oh, they're scheming to do this, but in so many cases, the movies are like barely finished. But they tried that with Django Unchained. They tried it with Scorsese's Silence.
They did. I remember.
Which
I went to that.
Yeah, I
screening.
remember.
Yeah.
That was like
And
a
that
Sunday
was
screening.
that's a
I
thinker.
saw it twice that day.
Right.
I
That's a
remember.
movie you
that's
need
not a
like
movie you-
5 months to come
Yeah.
around.
People
Yeah.
were away for Thanksgiving, and then I think we were voting like the next day or 2 days later or something. And I remember talking to people, and most people hadn't seen it because they were like, "Well, I was like, I was away for Thanksgiving."
And it's just not a movie where you walk out being like, well, I'm sold. You know, like I love Silence. I think it's a great movie. I don't think it's a movie you need. You need like 2 months.
But I talk about, we talk about
like
this a lot.
staring into a pool of
Yeah,
water.
I agree. We talk about this a lot, but like, you know, the limited pool of like people who've won the Palme d'Or twice or have won like more than 2 Oscars, right? I'm like, I feel like there's this, whether it's conscious or not, sort of feeling from those boards of like, or at least this should be the standard. If you've already won that many times, you know, it's like, it either should be, this is so clearly above and beyond what you've previously done. It's just executed at an exponentially higher level than the last time we awarded you. Or it is so different from what you've done before, we didn't know you had this in you. And I think at this point in our current day era, Spielberg is a little bit a victim of having proven that he could do anything. Like Schindler, they were like, you know what? We didn't know you could make something this somber and restrained. And then Saving Private Ryan, they were like, we didn't know you could make something this kind of visceral and like disturbing and, you know, but still with the uplift. Now, as opposed to the first half of his career that we're covering now, where it feels like you even just look at the 80s as a microcosm for him, right? He makes E.T. and the Indiana Jones trilogy, the like peaks of commercial cinema. And then in between those, he's like doing experiments that the public is like, you know, Color Purple, always, Empire of the Sun. Like it's a little like back and forth where they're like, we prefer you doing the Spielberg thing. By the time he gets to the 90s, people are like, you know what? He can do anything he wants. We don't question him. We're not going to like every movie, but there's no like guard up against he shouldn't try to make a historical drama. He shouldn't try to make a film about adults, etc.
There's I think part of it is also Spielberg is himself a little unmoored during this time. The other thing I remember from this period is, you know, Spielberg actually enters a period that, I mean, I don't want to call it a period of decline, but there is a period when he's not kind of the king of the roost, right? I mean, it kind of starts with this one. Always is terrible.
I kind of like it. I just saw it for the first time. I kind of like it. It does not.
Every time I watch it, I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going to like it this time. I bet I'm going to like it this time. And I'm like, no, sorry. I've seen it 3 times. But
that's actually,
I know that's really, that's my equivalent of a
few.
Leonard Maltin bomb.
That's like turning it off after 10 minutes for most people.
First 10 minutes of Always are really good.
I agree.
Always starts pretty strong.
It actually, that's what it is. It's every time I put it on, it's like it starts and I'm like, oh, this is really good. I'm going to really like this. And then it just completely falls apart.
Where do you stand on Last Crusade?
Last Crusade might be my least favorite of the Indiana Jones movies.
Because it's too kind of like straightforward and
See, that's
silly.
the one where the ending doesn't work for me. A lot of people hate the endings of the other ones, but like it just the cup. I like this is the cup of a carpenter. Like I love that. That sense chills up my spine. But like that whole finale, and then with the Night of the Round Table and all that, I for some reason, also because there was this period where it seemed like there was such a kind of weird religiosity in Spielberg's movies, and that one kind of just brought it home. I do like the movie. I've seen it many times. I've taken my son to see it at like whenever Metrograph shows it. It's a very fun movie.
It is my favorite, but I'm also like, I don't think it's a particularly deep film. I think it's just exemplary Spielberg entertainment.
Yeah.
And it's very on my comedic wavelength.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, it is a comedy. It's actually maybe the only time he's really pulled off a comedy.
We were talking about this, and that is a great take. That is
this argument on 1941. Not argument. I just sort of pointed out that like basically all of his worst movies are his cleanest attempts at comedies. Like 1941, The Terminal, arguably Always.
He can't do comedy and he can't do romance.
No,
which is why Always stinks.
We were saying what's weird is that he's really good at applying comedy to non-comedy movies.
Oh, absolutely.
But when the assignment is full comedy, it doesn't work. I think Last Crusade, you are right, is his most successful comedy. And I feel like a lot of Indiana Jones purists and people who are the right age to grow up with them talk about it in a kind of Return of the Jedi way, where they're like, that one comes out when I'm 17 and it felt kiddie-ish and I was over it. And I think a lot of that is it's very silly, but it's successful at being silly.
At the time, it also felt to me like, and whenever I have this kind of take about a filmmaker, I realize I'm totally talking out my ass because it takes them a long time to get these projects off the ground. But it did feel like he had a couple of flops and he was kind of going back to what worked. And he's all right, here's an Indiana Jones sequel. Which, maybe there was some of that, but knowing how these films get made and how long it takes, it's more complicated than that. I will say I have this, I've probably talked to one of you guys about this, but I have this unified field theory of Spielberg.
Let's do this.
Which is this is the place to debut it, our Spielberg miniseries.
No, I mean I've written about this in a couple of places, but I have this theory that early period of his career, 70s, 80s, that his films really can best be understood as being from the point of view of a child. And then there's the back half of his career. Mm-hmm. They make a lot more sense if you see them through the eyes of a parent.
I think
one of the reasons
100% on board.
Yes. And the fact that I know you guys are not fans of Hook, but I think Hook,
I'm not a huge fan.
Hook is the pivot point. Halfway through Hook, Spielberg realizes
I must put away childish things.
Yes, and that's what Hook is about. And I later found out, because I had this idea, and then later I found out, or I was told that it's during the making of Hook, or right around then, that he reconciles with his dad.
Right. And kind of gets a fuller understanding of Seth Rogen's role in his dad's, marriage falling apart and all that.
I think you are right, and we will spend our time debating Hook in a couple weeks. I will say my exact problem with Hook is I feel like he makes that realization like halfway through making the movie, and that realization comes with, I shouldn't have made this movie.
I mean, he does not like that movie at all.
Right.
And Jurassic Park is about a guy learning to be a parent.
Jurassic Park is the much better version of what the story that Hook is trying to tell.
Well, because Hook is him like monologuing to his son, being like, I should just play baseball with you. And I'm just like, can we have a sword fight, please?
Right.
but like, if you look at, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, Jurassic Park, if you think about, it's all about Sam Neill learning to become a dad. Like, that's really kind of the full flower of Spielberg's change in perspective.
And it's also so crazy because it's like this roller coaster movie that he was like, can I slip in like 10% of an emotional spine underneath this? And it's so kind of underplayed and unspoken. And yet it's so personal and revealing and deeply felt.
10 years earlier, that movie would have been all about those kids.
Correct.
Right. And in fact, as I was rewatching Lincoln, there's that little moment I totally forgotten about where Abraham Lincoln slaps his son, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt. And I was thinking about, there are actually a surprising number of slaps in Spielberg movies.
Mm-hmm.
And you could really do a fun montage of them. But then I was thinking,
this has a huge one.
Well, yes, absolutely. But I was thinking about the slap in Jaws,
Mhm.
right? The mother
Yeah.
who slaps
At the
Roy Scheider.
hospital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a great moment in Jaws, iconic moment in Jaws. But, who do we identify with there? I mean, we identify with Roy Scheider because he's obviously the protagonist. But really what we're identifying there is his humiliation, right? So it's very much almost like the humiliation of a little boy who's been slapped. And then the later films, it's like...
What are some other slaps?
Well, watching the Joseph Gordon-Levitt scene, I was kind of like, you don't really feel Joseph Gordon-Levitt's humiliation. You feel Abraham Lincoln's,
It's
anxiety.
right. That's a pivot point.
Yes.
Yeah.
God, Lincoln is so good. But I mean, everything about Lincoln is good. Every single thing, in my opinion, about Lincoln is good. But all the best stuff is just all his cabinet. I mean, I think I said this on our episode. Anytime they're like, what should we do? This is the most stressful shit in the world. And he's like, there was an old mill, and they're like, God damn it, will you stop with your fucking stories, you homie, stupid lawyer.
One time I found a pencil on a porch.
I was watching it.
A man had a bucket of water, and they're like, it's a civil war.
Is this metaphorical or literal?
I was watching with my son, and he had such a great time watching it.
It's so fun.
It actually is. It's
about dirtbags.
It's another instance of him applying comedy.
Yes.
In a situation where comedy would not. I mean, that's kind of the old Spielberg coming through. It's like, let's make this
Spader, Hawks, Three Stooges,
so
Tim Blake Nelson shit.
It's also the original. I mean, it's not the original Oppenheimer, but it definitely has that Oppenheimer vibe of
what if every single person is someone deeply important as an actor?
Yeah. I love the thing you said about Oppenheimer, Griffin, on your episode. I think it was you, where you said everybody in this movie has at some point been number one on a call sheet.
Yes,
which is a great way to put it.
Yeah. I love everything you're saying, and the sort of prism you're putting around this movie, because this is, I think, a big turning point movie as well. He has not yet done the perspective shift to that of the parent, but this feels like the movie of him trying to kill the child inside of him.
Well, it
feels like him being like, I need to move on.
Well, it's a movie about the loss of innocence. I mean, it's a movie about the death of childhood, as is The Color Purple, but this much more explicitly.
But the difference to me is that in this one, it feels like he's recognizing I'm still viewing this too much from the perspective of the child, rather than being able to look back on childhood as an adult. And that's what he's really trying to change here. I feel like we commit to doing this. We put our schedule on the spreadsheet. I typed your name in for months before we even reached out to you, where I was just like, that feels like a good fit. And I know Bilge is one of the big, this is his most undersung movie defenders.
Well, it's also, formally the movie is so interesting to me because Spielberg has his vernacular, right? I mean, Spielberg has his language. He has his favorite shots. He has the crane shots and the tracking shots, and this film feels to me like him asking himself, how can I tell this darker, more mature story using my stuff, using my language? And because there's I don't know if you guys have ever seen, there's a 1 hour making of this movie.
Of this?
Available on the Blu-ray. I used to have this movie on Laserdisc.
My digibook here, which also has
that's the one I have.
Warner at War DVD.
I have not watched that. That looks really interesting.
That is an Amblin production and 47 minutes long. I bet it rules.
Yeah.
In this documentary, you see him directing these scenes, and it's really impressive. I mean, the way they completely made over Shanghai to look like Shanghai back then. But then you see him shooting the scene at the camp, which is the kind of the big emotional moment in the film where Jim sees the pilot, the plane flying by, and Cadillac of the Skies. And you see Spielberg directing Christian Bale, and he tells him you're in a real cool action figure shot, like that. Those are the words he uses, and it is true. That's he's got that kind of that stance. And it's so interesting to me that Spielberg uses that language to define that shot, because it is a cool shot, but it's such a dark moment, right? And you see, you also, I mean, John Williams' score for this, obviously, which is magnificent, as it always is. But in some ways, it's like feels like his most classical score to me.
The biggest motif in it is one that he did not write.
Yeah, no.
Right. It's what the hymn at the beginning of the film, which gets repeated in so many ways. Yeah.
But then also like it's kind of this like it has this very jaunty, playful theme, but then under it are these sort of very dark chords running through. Like it really is Spielberg and his people, including John Williams, trying to take like what they know about how to put together a movie and like just tip it just a little bit so that the story becomes a lot darker.
But then he makes Schindler's List. And that I feel like erases this movie in everyone's mind because that's a sort of more successful or more
People
broadly like
look back as this was the dry run before he totally cracked it on Schindler.
But he also said, but the other thing I remember on Schindler's List was he really restrained himself. Like that's the thing that people would always
says that.
I know.
He's a fucking liar.
He is a
Schindler's
liar.
List is so liquid entertaining, even when it's so upsetting. Like
it is,
yes,
but I will say at the time it did feel really restrained. And
I
in fact,
get that.
And they talked about how. I mean, he actually talked about how, like, technically speaking, he limited the amount.
Away.
Like he limited, the amount of tracks.
But it still has incredible wonders, and
especially compared to the shit we get today.
Well, that's the other thing about Spielberg. But no, my whole wolves
like David
inside
Lean
me
now,
thing. Well, but that's the pin in that. But that's the whole wolves inside me thing about Schindler, where I'm just like, this movie is so goddamn entertaining. And like, should there be entertainment about something
this
like
is the Hanukkah argument.
Right.
But I mean, the whole thing with that movie is, and it feels almost like a reaction to people being like, not quite on Empire of the Sun. Schindler, the infamous thing is that he was like, I won't storyboard this. I need to like go there and be in the place and like engage with the emotions and feel it out rather than doing like a puppet show kind of controlling shit. And that's the part of it that I think felt very restrained to him, is he didn't allow himself the time to like math it out in advance. We did our Color Purple episode very recently. Great Kenise Mobley as our guest. And she said this line that I thought summed it up really well, where she's like, the weird cognitive dissonance in this movie is like him shooting sexual assault scenes like they're E.T. And to some degree, it feels like the locker room bully confrontation with in Fabelmans,
right?
Where he's just like, I don't understand why I make everything look like this, right? That like everything becomes too magical if I shoot it. This feels like the first movie where he successfully, to your point of what you're getting at, figures out how to shift his aesthetic a little bit so that it doesn't feel too like wonderful. And even just, the most recent episode in weird record order we did right before this, earlier this week, was 1941. And 1941 has that thing where you're just like, Jesus Christ, this is too expensive. You can't stop thinking about how big the production is,
hyperactive,
the resources, so much going on. This has these insane long oneers in like huge environments with hundreds of extras and planes flying overhead, and knowing that stuff is logistically impossible. And yet I think it is the first time in his career he can orchestrate something like that and not make it feel like he's playing with toys, not make it feel like he's showing off, make it feel like it's actually just kind of like immersive environmental recreation. I'd seen this once before. Our friend Connor Ratliff had never seen it, and they were playing it at Metrograph maybe like 10 years ago, a little less, very shortly after Metrograph opened, and was like, this is what I want to do for my birthday. It is a very funny birthday movie. But he was like, it's a Spielberg blind spot, so everyone should come see Empire of the Sun with me. And we all were just kind of bummed out afterwards. But I was like, I've heard this recent. People are kind of revisiting it and reclaiming it. And I saw it and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. I see what he was getting at. It doesn't totally work. Watched it again today. Like 15 minutes in, I was like, is this a masterpiece? Do I now put this on his top tier? Which Spielberg top tier is
ridiculous.
Is ridiculous and also is big. It's like, how many tiers are you creating of like unquestionable masterpieces versus near masterpieces or whatever? But there were a couple things that really like unlocked for me, especially watching 1941 and Color Purple recently in relation to this. But the like Spielberg face, right? The sort of famous image of the Spielberg wonder face, the overhead looking up at whatever.
His O face.
His O face. This movie, even like thinking about him directing Christian Bale in that way, you have those moments where Christian Bale is doing the Spielberg face at the plane overhead, and yet he is now shooting him from below. He's tilting up. You're not in the perspective of the thing that the kid is looking at in wonder. You are on the ground looking at a kid look up at something unseen ominously, and it's like, fuck, he's figuring it out. You're watching in real time him figuring out how to, as you said, shift his language a little bit, subvert it a little bit, successfully create different types of emotion without just making everything feel magical and entertaining. It is the weird balance of him of like, it is hard for him to make something that is not entertaining. He has like such kind of like showman storyteller bones in him. That right,
it's his Midas touch thing or whatever. Like it's a bit of a curse that sometimes
he wrestles with, and I think in this movie, to a certain degree, he's working so hard to fight against that must have been frustrating to people at the time.
I want to resolve a few pins.
Please take some pins out of the board, but I think this movie's excellent.
I think John Williams should have won the Oscar for Best Score on top of his wins that he, I think, largely deserved already. I think he should have won for Home Alone over Dances with Wolves. That might be my most controversial take.
John Barry, though.
The John Barry score for Dances with Wolves is very, very good.
And hey, by the way, let's put a pin in Kevin Costner. As we're taking some pins out, let's put some other ones in. Pin in Costner.
The Home Alone score, I think, has endured in ways maybe people didn't see coming in 1991. Anyway.
I agree. And also, you and I say that might be the single greatest, like, power boost of a score to a movie ever.
Right. It is a huge, yes, you're right. It's a huge help to that movie. I don't think he should have won for Saving Private Ryan. I think that score is very good, very sort of stately and, you know,
Hans Zimmer
military.
Should have won for
That's
the Thin
what's
Red Line.
crazy. Hans Zimmer should have won for the Thin Red Line, although I think that score is sort of oddly deployed in the movie. It's an amazing score. Or it's unusually deployed in the movie.
Well, it's the classic
like
Malick thing where it was like scored and then he recut it and put pieces where they weren't written.
Right. And Zimmer's like, what the fuck did you do?
But
Anyway.
you listen to that as an album and it's one of the most unbelievable pieces.
It's an incredible score. And becomes like the go-to score for trailer.
Yeah.
There's a funny story. I don't know if you guys have read this new biography of Terrence Malick that came out by John Bleasdale.
I want to read it.
It's great. It's a really great. And he got a lot of access. But there's a very funny story in it about how Disney uses the score for the Thin Red Line when they do the Pearl Harbor trailer.
It's what makes the Pearl Harbor trailer look like a fucking Best Picture
when
winner.
People thought
and they didn't get permission to do this. Apparently.
Oh, really?
And then years later, there was something. I wish I remembered this specific part of the story, but years later, there's something Malick needs from Disney, and one of his assistants is like, you know, they're being pains in the neck about it. He says,
like, play the card. Right.
He says to them, send them a message with 2 words, Pearl Harbor. And immediately he gets what he wants.
This is like the Ernie Sabella Pumbaa story I've told many times.
As if Malick isn't just some like wide-eyed innocent wandering through the wheat. He knows how to play the game.
This guy has been in the industry forever.
Life is Beautiful won that year, which is like an odd win, in my opinion. I think Randy Newman's Pleasantville score is better. I think Saving Private Ryan is better. I think Thin Red Line is probably your actual winner there. He, in my opinion, all right, he probably was never going to win in 2001 because Lord of the Rings wins for Best Score. Then Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
And that was for AI score?
He's nominated for both AI and Harry Potter. It's like the kind of 1-2 punch of like Williams can give you an iconic theme for like a big family movie. He can also do his AI score, one of his most beautiful scores, so sad.
But that was never going to win at the time with how much people hated that movie.
And also, I would argue that the score isn't always that well used in the movie.
In the movie, it's a score I love listening to. In the movie itself, sometimes it overwhelms.
It overwhelms the ending, I think.
In a way that I think caused people to misread the film at the time. A lot of people who thought, it was.
I mean, I was very mixed on AI when I first saw it. I like it a lot now. I still have some issues with how the Kubrick sensibility and
it's
the
a very strange Frankenstein.
It's a very strange. I mean, that's what makes it so unforgettable in a way.
Nothing like.
Still, whenever I watch it, I'm like, that scene doesn't quite.
We all agree he should have won for Catch.
He lost to Elliot Goldenthal, the great Elliot Goldenthal, for Frida, which is lovely and interesting and like sort of, but
this is ripple effect. If Elliot Goldenthal had won for Batman and Robin, then we wouldn't have been in this position.
Forever is his better Batman.
I prefer the Batman Robin score.
But that's an iconic year. The score. Well, his Heat score is very cool.
Although who knows how much of it he wrote.
Right, I was about to say. But Far From Heaven, the Elmer Bernstein score for that is amazing. The Hours, very divisive, but the Philip Glass score for The Hours is like, I love it.
Philip Glass, kind of.
He's a king.
Yeah.
And Thomas Newman's Road to Perdition score. Yes,
That's an
Thomas
incredible
Newman
score.
often kind of hits the same notes, but a really good score.
Not,
Yeah, I agree.
not a fan of that movie, but I like Thomas Newman. I don't remember that score.
I like
it's
that
good.
movie and that score quite
No,
a bit.
I've only seen it once.
Anyway.
Wow. That's like not seeing it at all.
That's like that. That's like me just pissing on a DVD of the movie.
Do you like Mendes generally? Because I'm very up and down on Mendes.
You know, the Mendes I really do like is Revolutionary Road,
Ugh, I
which
hate
which
that.
See,
everyone
that
hates.
I need to
Passion.
rewatch.
Fucking
Yeah,
hate that
everyone
movie.
hates
Yeah.
that, and I think Skyfall is.
I think
good.
Skyfall
I think
He really
Skyfall is
should've-
his best movie.
He's kind of.
Period.
He should
Possibly.
have just. There's some directors who I'm like, just do Bond movies.
Yeah, he should
Yeah.
have become what's his name? Who was the guy who did like 10 Bond movies in the 70s?
Ooh, like
John Glenn?
Yeah,
Yeah.
or Lewis Hamilton.
Right,
But
I'm like, he should have become one of them. And
no,
just
but
been
the whole thing with Mendes doing Skyfall, which is a movie I love, is that helps Bond convince itself it's become a prestige
Yeah.
genre. And it's like, maybe you guys actually need to chill out a little bit and go back to basics a little bit, and not be like 2 hours and 45 minutes long and have these.
Well, yeah,
kind
no,
of-
you're
It's a
right.
poser movie, but it kind of needs.
It has-
it's
he's
good,
he's a
to be
poser,
clear.
a negative
get
effect
a
on
poser
the next
to direct
two
the
movies,
poser
though,
movie,
maybe.
you know?
Yeah.
One last pin. The list, the 9 directors who've won the Palme d'Or twice, is such a weird list of like masters and kind of like right place, right time guys.
Okay, so Osland,
Ruben
Coppola.
Ostlund is a right place, right time guy, in my opinion.
I
No
agree.
offense to him.
Kusturica is one of my all-time favorites.
I know you
although
love
he's-
him.
although he's like a monster now.
Has he become a monster?
Oh, he has been for a while.
Older European directors, it's always a crapshoot with
I
those
mean, it was-
guys.
it was-
you don't want to give them Twitter.
It was already evident in Underground, which is a film I love, but you know, the breakup of Yugoslavia really sent him. And
he's a little hard right on that stuff.
Yeah, he's
Dennis Miller effect.
I mean,
Kusturica is Kusturica is I've not seen When Father Was Away on Business. I have seen Underground. I don't know.
Have you
his
seen
films very well.
Time of the Gypsies?
No, I have never.
Time of the Gypsies is fantastic. That's
it
the
out.
one that's really, I mean, Underground I really love. I love When Father Was Away on Business, but it was seeing Time of the Gypsies, which I believe only won like Best Director or Grand Jury Prize or something, that really kind of knocked my socks off when I was a kid.
And then so Coppola, you mentioned obviously that he's up there. Can you name the others?
Did Dardennes win twice?
Of course.
Yeah.
Visconti won twice, I think, right?
Mm-mm.
No?
Does like Zinnemann win twice? Isn't
No.
there an old Hollywood director who won
No.
twice? No. Okay.
All right, I'll tell you the others.
Yeah.
Alf Schoberg, that barely counts.
Miss Julie?
Loach?
Miss Julie and Tormund. Ken Loach.
And Loach, that's right. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Which he's a great director, great filmmaker. I think both of those wins are sort of viewed.
It's
a little
Barley and
askance.
Daniel Blake.
Mhm.
Yeah,
weird
I
ones.
mean,
Looking at
I
HS.
really like when the wind shakes the barley. I saw that
did
film
too.
very late. I remember at the time people were really upset about its win. When I finally saw it, I was like, oh, this is actually really good. Daniel Blake, I was there for that can. That was my first can, and I remember, and I like Daniel
It's
Blake.
pretty good.
But that was those can awards were a war crime, and that was heartbreaking. George Miller's
George
jury.
Miller, great guy.
That was
But,
the year of Tony Erdmann. That was the year of The Handmaiden.
It was the year that Tony Erdmann was obviously going to win, and clearly George Miller, or at least a couple of people in the jury, were just kind of like not into it.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I was pulling for The Handmaiden that year.
Another great pick.
I mean,
is
there
also
were a
weird 'cause
lot. It was
Tony
a great
Erdmann-
can, and none of the big films won. And none of the really good films won anything, if I remember correctly. I mean, Daniel Blake was fine. It's just I would not have given.
Walking in nature.
I was going to say, Tony Erdmann, the character in character, feels like he would fit in the wasteland. Like you would imagine George Miller would take to that.
Yeah,
Be
sure.
like, this guy could be the mayor of fucking Bullet Town.
That was it. Yeah, because it's when Xavier Dolan wins the Grand Prix,
That's-
and
and we
Mads
get-
Mikkelsen.
We
looks
get the Mads
shocked,
Mikkelsen
right.
face, and what was it? The guy who directed Son of Saul,
Sure.
Laszlo Nemes.
Yeah, Laszlo Nemes. Sure.
He was on the jury that year.
Uh-huh.
And the Xavier Dolan film, everybody hated. Even the people who
Right.
really like Xavier Dolan
fucking
that.
hated it, probably.
Yeah. But then was also angry that he had to share the award with Godard. Or was that a different year?
That's a different year.
I hated that shit.
But that at the press conference, somebody asked Laszlo Nemes something about that film, I think. But like the question was different, and he answered the question with the weirdest response, which was, yes, I know that some people think that because Xavier Dolan was on the jury last year and I won the grand jury prize, that I felt the need to give him the grand jury prize this year. but I assure you that that's not true. And it was kind of, it was
no
very
one was
much a kind
asking
of,
that.
it's very much of my t-shirt is asking.
I did not fuck that cat.
Yeah, exactly.
I have never fucked a cat.
Yeah, because everybody was like, wait, what, really? Oh my God, is this a thing? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but it was kind of crazy that movie won the fucking grand jury prize.
Wait,
It's crazy.
Did we go through all the
The others are Billy August, who won very close
Right.
together. And Best Intentions, kind of a weird winner. Pell the Conqueror, more of a traditional winner. Shohei Mimura, who's a great filmmaker. And The Eel tied with Taste of Cherry. So, like, whatever.
And
It's
The
half a
Eel
palm.
is such a strange, that
Sure
is a
is.
very strange movie to give a palm to.
And Michael Haneke. He's more in the, master territory. Although, like, I don't know, is he going to make another movie? What's he doing? Is he old? Yeah, I guess he's pretty old.
I mean, he had a career before he became kind of.
Was he like a carpenter or something? What do you mean?
No, I mean, like he had made like films for television and stuff like that.
Sure. Before yeah,
I would love to hear that, like, John Carpenter style. He's like, he's on
just
Xbox
fucking rock
Live.
the Xbox.
Right, I'm
exactly.
playing with Hanukkah all the time. We're doing Halo together.
The last thing, and we'll say this as we talk about Empire of the Sun, right? But it is very strange that The Last Emperor and Empire of the Sun, these two movies that are like both kind of being sold with the like, no one's ever filmed in China before, like an American movie, or are happening kind of at the same time and kind of about the same period in history, a little like 10 years apart.
Is this not also, is Hope and Glory not also this same year,
So
which
that's
kind of eats this
crazy.
movie's lunch on this sort of
The
war from the
kid-
perspective of a child thing?
Right, kid
At
in
least at
war.
the time.
I mean, critics liked Hope and Glory more. I mean, it's a big year for those types of stories. But I think China is also opening up during this period. I mean,
Of course, that's why it's happening.
I mean,
right?
that's what happens with Bertolucci in Last Emperor, where
But Bertolucci's kind of getting one on Spielberg, or Spielberg's like, I'm shooting in Shanghai. No one's shot an American production here. And Bertolucci's like, I got into the Forbidden City. The name is Forbidden. And I got in, you bitch. The whole first hour of my movies, what, yours is set in some bombed out hellscape? Mine's in the most beautiful palace ever built by man.
That was a weird press conference too, where Bertolucci called
Bertolucci's
Spielberg
like,
a bitch.
at the weigh-in.
Yeah. He's holding up the belt. Ruthless aggression style.
I think The Last Emperor is a better movie than this movie. But I like both.
I would agree because I
have never
love
seen
Last Emperor. You've never seen The Last Emperor?
Last Emperor.
You haven't seen a lot of the Tony 80s epics that
Correct.
won Best Picture. You've
Correct.
never seen Out of Africa. You've never
Yeah.
seen, well, Driving Miss Daisy isn't an epic, but another kind of like middle brow Best Picture winner.
The 80s Best Picture winners, I'm weirdly kind of battling.
Last Emperor much better than Out of
Yeah.
Africa or
Yeah,
Driving
I
Miss
mean,
Daisy,
Last
in my
Emperor,
opinion.
I love. It's not my favorite movie of all time.
Okay,
It's not
fine.
even my favorite Bertolucci movie, but
All
I.
right. Well, you
it-
know what, Bilge? I'll
Sorry, no.
fuck myself.
Well, no, 87 is the year I discovered like Bertolucci. I was like 14 and I discovered Italian cinema and French cinema. And then at the end of the year, The Last Emperor comes out and I'm just like in hog heaven. But also
You
because
were the only person in hog heaven watching The Last
I'm
Emperor.
sure. I don't even have to talk about how many times I've
Everyone
seen that
else
movie.
is like seeing Repo Man or whatever. You're like, I'm in hog heaven with The Last Emperor.
Repo Man is 86.
Yeah, I was close.
87 is also, I think 87 is also Alex Cox's Walker.
Oh, very
Which
chill
is
and normal
another
movie.
favorite movie and that's a movie everybody hated.
What was your immediate response walking out of Empire of the Sun? Knowing you ultimately would then alternate and see it every other week.
I loved it when I first saw it. I mean, I remember.
You'd probably seen most of Spielberg's big movies.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I mean,
It's ubiquitous.
In the 80s, we were growing up with Spielberg,
Right, and he's kind of growing up with you.
Yes,
like he's
exactly.
making more adult movies at the exact age that you're ready to start seeing more adult movies.
Right. That's the other thing. As I was rewatching Empire of the Sun, in preparation for this, it dawned on me. I was like, oh, I grew up with him, even though he's obviously much older than I am. But there is this he's making movies for kids when I'm a kid, and as his movies grow up, I'm growing up with them, and that really, I'm like that was really fascinating to kind of think about. But he, first of all, the first 30, 40 minutes of Empire of the Sun are masterful. Even the critics who didn't like the movie were like, I think even Pauline Kael was just like, the first 30 minutes, like the invasion of Shanghai. I mean, he stages that with such great control. And it's so funny. You were saying, it's like him learning to kind of give up his toys. And the scene is literally a boy dropping his toy
away.
and
Yeah.
then trying to
That's where I think this movie is not self-critical, but very aware and sort of like scathing of his whole persona and worldview. Like this movie is this kid literally getting slapped to be like, fucking engage with the real world. Your chauffeur's not coming. You can't exist in your fantasy land of like Halloween costumes and toys. Yeah. I think I can't relate to.
And I'm going to actually open the dossier. In the 1980s, Steven Spielberg befriended David Lean. David Lean would have been what? I'm looking up his age. I mean, like, very old at this point, like in his 70s. He died at the age of 83 in 91. So he's in his like
died on
early
my birthday,
70s.
if I remember correctly.
It's a terrible present.
It's 16th of April?
Yeah.
Wow.
David Lean does he does Passage to India in 84. Right.
And that's
his last movie.
That's his last movie.
Okay.
And he's like working on Nostromo for a while, and then that doesn't happen.
But this, in theory, would have been his last film. I mean, obviously not that he was planning it as such, but yeah.
But like Passage to India, though, I do feel like as people at the time is received by people being like, this is a film from a person from another age. Like, yes, of course it's impressive. But David Lean is not exactly with the modern.
I remember seeing Passage to India with my dad.
Alec Guinness is in brown face, and everyone's like, "Why is Alec Guinness in brown face?"
Right. So my dad, has always been a huge cinephile, and I owe my cinephilia to him. But I remember seeing Passage to India with him, and he was very mixed on David Lean. He was not a big David Lean fan.
He leaned back,
and
as a viewer,
I was leaning in, he was leaning back. But as we were watching, or maybe this was. We wouldn't have talked during the movie, but I do remember this exchange, which is the scene where the doctor is like on the train, where he's walking on the.
Okay, I have seen the Passage to India one time, like 15 years ago. Sure.
There's a shot of the doctor, whose name I forget, sort of walking between train cars on the outside of the train, and it's an incredible shot. And I remember saying to my dad, "How can you not like a movie that has a shot like this?" And I remember he said, I dislike it because there's a shot like this. Like he was like, this grandiosity is too much.
Is that the essential divide between you and your father as like film viewers? Because you like grandiosity. Okay?
I like grandiosity.
Yeah.
He actually likes grandiosity too.
He just needs it to be earned.
It was often, we actually had a lot of really political disagreements over films. My dad was kind of at the time, I mean, he, later changed his ideas on things, but he was kind of an old school communist back in the day. And we actually had a lot of arguments over Bertolucci films, over which ones were like true to the revolution and which ones weren't and stuff like that. Like he was very much a 1900 man, and I was much more of a Last Emperor man. And he felt like Last Emperor, he liked the movie, but he felt like it kind of sold out a little bit.
It's too sympathetic to this imperial creature, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know.
But this is the thing I genuinely love about you as a critic, is that you are very discerning in what you will like wholeheartedly endorse as a fully functional, masterpiece or whatever. But I do like your transparency in sometimes being like, there is an element of craft in this, or a performance, or a theme, or a feeling that I like. It elevates this movie, even if maybe the movie isn't great, beyond some more functional films. I can't throw this out because there's something here that is sticking with me.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine a lot of critics are like this, but there's like sometimes there's something you love in a movie, and even if the rest of the movie doesn't work, I mean, sometimes it's like just like the score. There's so many films I've seen where I'm like, oh, I love that movie, and then I watch it, I'm like, I think I just kind of like the score, but I like how the score is used in the movie, so I can't just listen to the score. I kind of have to see the movie.
I truly am not backhanding anyone in particular in my mind, but I do feel like, especially from like the experience of going to critic screenings and then reading those people's reviews, that sometimes you see people clearly enjoy a thing in a movie, but then their like analytical brain comes on and they're like, I can't fully endorse this as a thing that works.
I have said this about certain films where I did this about That's My Boy, where I went. Have we had this conversation?
No, but
like when I went to see That's My Boy at a critic screening, I sat in that room with all these critics laughing their asses off, and I was sitting next to a couple of them. I'm like, you laughed. And then the next day you see their reviews and they're all trashing the movie. I'm like, you guys are fucking lying. You sat there for 2 hours or hour and a half or whatever it was, laughing your asses off. And my thing with the review was, listen, objectively, this movie is, probably a piece of shit, but I laughed my ass off. What can I say? Same thing with Vacation. the Vacation remake.
You've always stood up for the Vacation remake, yes. But speaking of the Vacation remake, David Lean, no, he's interested in J.G. Ballard's semi-autobiographical novel, which had just come out in 1984. He asks Spielberg to check in on the rights for him. I guess Lean is just kind of like sitting in his estate being like, get that Hollywood guy on the phone.
The sort of string of great older filmmakers who somehow collaborated with Spielberg only for Spielberg to wind up directing their movies.
Right. We'll talk about the Billy Wilder Schindler thing in a couple weeks.
Right.
But
Yeah, or
in
like, AI and Kubrick.
Right.
And,
knowing that he was so
Spielberg
high.
had good taste in these people.
This is what I was going to say.
Them out.
Him being so high level, being such a king of Hollywood, and also these guys knowing that he was such a cinephile and had such respect for the masters. All of them are like, if Spielberg extends his like check to me, I'm good. And it's a little bit of like Jordan Peele being like, I'm going to hire Spike Lee to make Black Klansman so he can win an Oscar finally, you know?
Yeah. So Spielberg checks in on the rights to this for David Lean. It's at Warner Brothers. Harold Becker, the not great, the okay Harold Becker.
yeah, that's a puzzling
the
choice there.
Director of Sea of Love and Taps is
a
attached.
solid journeyman kind
Right.
of studio guy. Yeah.
And so Spielberg says like, yeah, it's tied up, like it's sort of spoken for. And then Becker drops out or whatever. And so Spielberg goes back to Lean, at least this is how Spielberg tells it, and says like, hey, it's available. And at that point, Lean is interested, as you say, in Nostromo, an adaptation of the Joseph Conrad book, which never happened. I guess Lean just got too
there
old.
was a BBC
leaned
TV
over.
version of it made, and I don't know if it was because I think Robert Bolt had written a screenplay. I read that screenplay once. I think I used to work at the BBC, and I remember I would just like steal all this stuff from them.
What did you do with the BBC?
Lord knows what he
It was
got
like my
up to
first
at the
job out of
BBC.
college. I actually had a very funny job at the BBC, which we won't get into here because it's very. But I had to prepare like little dossiers for all the productions that they co-financed.
You were the JJ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lean is like, you do it. You know, I don't want to do that anymore, but you go do it. Lean said he lost interest. Quote, this is a quote from Lean saying, this is a bloody, well-written and very interesting diary. I don't think it has enough of a dramatic shape.
Yeah. But Spielberg also said from the moment that Lean brought it to him, he was like, fuck, secretly, I kind of want to direct this. So I think he was thrilled when Lean threw it over to him.
Right. Lean, Spielberg also apparently was like, I'll produce Nostromo for you, and started giving notes on a Christopher Hampton's screenplay.
That's probably the
Christopher
one I'm
Hampton.
thinking of.
And Lean was like, fuck you don't give me notes. And Spielberg was like, okay. I just backed off. It was just like, I don't want to piss you off. So Spielberg is, why do you think he's intrigued by Empire of the Sun? It's through the eyes of a boy.
Yeah. It's an opportunity for him to make his definitive end of innocence movie.
Right.
And a lot of
Have
it
you guys
talks
read the
about it.
novel?
No, I
No.
never have. I've read a lot of J.G. Ballard, but never that one.
And I've read
all
no
the freak
J.G.
shit.
Ballard except for that one.
Right.
It's beautifully written. It
Sure,
is
he's a
beautifully
wonderful
written,
writer.
and it's so, the landscapes and the action, everything is so vividly described. You can easily tell just by reading it, just through the language, why Spielberg thought, okay, I can do something with this, or for that matter, why David Lean thought he could do something with it. It's very dark, though. I mean, they have definitely sanitized it for the film.
This didn't happen to him. He did grow up in Shanghai, but he wasn't
Spielberg? No,
separated
he
from
was
his
not
parents,
alive
right?
at
Like
this
there
point
is
in time.
some dramatic.
Yeah, no,
Right.
it's a novel. I mean,
Right.
it is a novel, although it's autobiographical.
Right.
Novel, I guess.
He grew up in that period.
yeah,
and
but
he
the-
suffered through the
the
Japanese
stuff
occupation.
described in the film and in the book is some of it is so gnarly and dark, and you do wonder if, and I don't know if how the script transpired and what its journey was, but when we talk about how Spielberg is taking this like darker story and not doing some of the things that he's been accused of doing in the past, there is definitely a lot of sanitizing happening and a lot of kind of condensing of characters and turning them into more of a Hollywoody plot element.
But I'll say this, not having read this book and also not having read The Color Purple, shamefully, watching The Color Purple movie, you can tell in real time it's sanitized, even if you don't know the source material. This,
Yeah, he dances around a lot
I'm
of
not
stuff. in Color Purple.
surprised to hear that,
Yeah.
but I don't feel it while
Yeah.
I'm watching it.
Neither did I. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why I was so surprised when I read the novel to find that it was so dark. But then
Color
there are-
Purple, you
yeah.
can tell he's avoiding stuff.
Yes.
This, it doesn't feel that way.
Ben, have you ever read any J.G. Ballard? I feel like
Chris
you would
Urban, aka
dig
Warhaz.
Crash.
Yeah, I read Crash.
High Rise, you'd probably dig. Atrocity Exhibition. Like these are Benny tales.
What's
in
the
my
best
opinion.
one?
I mean, I think High Rise is so cool, but it's a book that really.
I feel like I'm the only person that likes the Wheatley movie.
I didn't mind that movie.
The Wheatley movie is what?
Of
He
High
made a movie of High
Rise.
Rise.
Oh,
with Tom
It's
Hiddleston.
High Rise is like these people move into a really fancy new apartment building in like 70s Britain, and it's like a weird nightmare zone that they can't escape from. It's very cool.
As sort of
That
society is
doesn't
collapsing.
sound like J.G. Ballard.
But I feel like you would dig it.
Yeah, you would. Yeah.
I should check it out. There's so many fucking books I need to check out.
Well, that's true.
But that's life. Huh?
You're a good reader, though.
I'm getting back
In your
to-
in your 20s, you were a big.
Yeah, I mean, I
You were a lit
mistakenly went to school for creative writing, thinking that was a smart idea that would lead to career opportunities. So I did a ton of reading then, and over the years, I kind of fall off from time to time. But yeah, I'm getting back into the swing of things.
Do you have a favorite novel?
Ooh.
Or
God.
That's a
Tough
great question.
No,
I
I
know
like
it's an absurd
Possible.
question.
like-
but-
What's your favorite novel?
Grapes of Wrath, maybe?
That's a pretty
I don't
good
know.
one.
But I mean, it's kind of my stock answer. Do you have a
Pretty good.
stock answer for a favorite novel?
No. I mean, I would say it's embarrassing at this point to say like On the Road,
On the Road, great.
but I was
Awesome.
such a huge fan of the Beats. That was like a very important era for me when I
Killer
was
Tofu
a
and
young man.
all
That's
their
awesome.
early work. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's a joke for two people.
Everybody keeps telling me to read the Dharma Bums. Did you ever read the Dharma Bums?
Sure. Yeah.
How was that?
Other Kerouac book? I've never read it.
Yeah. I mean, all of the other Kerouac stuff can be hit or miss.
Uh-huh.
Trying to think, the Subterraneans is
Okay.
a great novel and very short, but I love that one.
So, Spielberg's interested. He obviously had been trying to make a Peter Pan movie for a long time. Hook is the eventual Peter Pan movie he makes, but he's kind of like, this is the opposite of Peter Pan. This is me getting to like strangle my Peter Pan movie.
A movie that literally opens with like a kid trying to goof around and someone being like, "Hey, stop it."
Yes. So he's also a war nerd. He's like a history nerd, like so many baby boomers.
And the thing we've already touched on, that he felt like being able to watch war films gave him an understanding of his father,
right,
a
who had
vet
served,
who
yes.
would not really talk about
And
it.
his father, I believe, was in the Air Force. So airplanes in particular are interesting to him, I guess. And he knows this isn't going to be a commercial project, really. Like he's, I guess, sort of aware of like, I'm not about to knock out a big hit, but he's also kind of working on like another Indiana Jones movie. There's a Tom Stoppard script when he comes aboard. He gets Menno Mejez, who wrote Color Purple, to do a pass. But then Stoppard comes back in and, does the other pass. He's the only credit on the movie, right? And Stoppard is kind of like, it's a masterpiece, and I kind of learned how to write movies with Steven helping me. Like as much as Tom Stoppard is obviously one of the most famous playwrights of his generation, like he becomes this kind of like Hollywood go-to guy, especially for rewrites. And he's kind of like, I learned a lot working on that in terms of like where you don't need dialogue. Like writing screenplays where like you can let the pictures take over. What's
Can I
up?
just sidebar very quickly here, because now it feels too relevant to not bring up. Do you know what I'm going to say, Ben?
No, I don't
You were just talking about your creative writing degree and how you've moved away from that. You did recently announce to us in
Yeah.
group text
Mhm.
that your resi for 2025 is that you want to become a produced playwright.
Yes. I always try to come up
That's
with a big resolution for myself.
You might remember
Just push
2018
myself.
when Ben said he was going to become a Goog Fell,
Yes, he was going to
get a Guggenheim Fellowship.
Yeah.
That still hasn't materialized, but working on it.
So these resolutions aren't always realistic.
But they're big.
Okay.
No, they're always big though.
Well, one year is to
Produced by-
ride on a horse, and he
Ride
did
dang
do that.
horse. You did ride a dang horse.
I rode the shit out of that horse. I also made a fashion brand.
yes, that
You
you
know?
did.
Some
I
of these
followed
haven't
through on
achieved.
that.
Yeah.
How's the sleep podcast coming?
Let's not talk about
Okay.
that.
So
You could write a play about riding a horse.
I mean, I'll add it to the list, the idea bank. But yeah, I'm trying to pivot to being a playwright.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
that's
well,
really
we still
cool.
need you producing.
Of
but-
course,
but
of
okay,
course.
okay, good. So Ballard meets Spielberg, loves him.
Well,
is
but
really
wait,
taken with him.
I think there's a reason why you're bringing this up.
Because we're talking about Tom Stoppard. It just being brought up as one of the great, most beloved modern playwrights. I was like, here's an inspiration, Ben. Here's someone.
Because I was talking about him, though. Maybe this wasn't a conversation with you,
Okay.
Griffin. He technically produced like a spin-off prequel of Shakespeare.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
And he directed the film version of it too.
Oh, really?
After this, a couple of years after this, and won like the big prize at, I want to say,
Did it win
Venice.
Venice? I think it won
I think
Venice.
It won Venice, right?
It's a play that I adore. I've never loved the movie.
I saw it once. I don't remember much about it.
But you're right. It's kind of the Lion King 1.5 of Romeo and Juliet.
It's just a
Hamlet.
it's a text that does not make sense as a movie.
Hamlet.
It's fun to watch those guys do it.
It's just funny as you were
idea of the
saying.
joke was good.
You were saying that Tom Stoppard kind of learned how to write movies from Empire of the Sun. I'm like, and then he went and did Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
But like doing your own play, it's often a bad idea.
And then didn't he do like heavy uncredited passes on both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith?
He definitely. I think that's the thing. He's in those. In the Spielberg Lucas like hangouts.
I thought you were going to say he's in those movies.
He's in those movies. He played Darth Maul.
People forget that.
He's in the Galactic Senate. You didn't see Tom Stoppard in the Galactic Senate.
And his character's name is Tom Stoppard, and he gets up there and he goes,
Stop
Tom
Ard.
Yeah.
Amy Irving had worked with Christian Bale in a TV film called Anastasia: The Mystery of Anna. So she had
that was his first acting job of any sort.
She recommends him to Steven Spielberg.
And this is his first theatrical film. Now,
Spielberg still like auditioned 4,000 kids or whatever, but like, obviously Bale is basically like the big find of the movie.
Now, I need to say this.
Go ahead.
In a future episode that we've already recorded, I go on a long tangent about Spielberg's weird failure to identify and break new male stars.
This is your bugbear with him, but it's a more recent bugbear.
I don't hold it against him, but I just think it's interesting that he has such a limited track record of it. And then I put this on this morning and I'm like, oh, right. He fucking found Christian Bale. This is the one huge exception to the rule that needs to be noted. So keep that in mind when you listen to me 5 weeks from now. Forget Christian Bale.
He's astonishing in this movie. But it is one of those like Spielberg kid performances where you're like, what is the alchemy here? Is Spielberg just so good with children?
Well,
but then obviously Bale became such a talented actor.
I was going to say.
But he also says that he hated making this movie and it made him feel like he never wanted to make a movie again.
And there is a period where it is not a certainty that Christian Bale will become a star.
No, I mean, in Newsies, he looks like he has guns trained on him.
Christian Bale had a bit of a parallel Henry Thomas arc where for a while it was like he can't come out from the shadow of him being a kid that Spielberg discovered. Even though he had a little less baggage than Thomas did and a little more success, it's not really until Batman when people were like, he's safe as an adult actor.
And he also, he takes on such risky material. He does Velvet Goldmine and he does American Psycho. He works with really interesting directors, number of female directors, which is a thing that young male stars never do.
Nope.
And even when the films aren't that good, there's like this body of work emerges where he's doing like really interesting work. So
he is one of my favorite actors.
Oh, I recently, a couple of years ago, somebody asked me like, who's your favorite actor? And I was trying to think about it and I realized of actors working today, I think Christian Bale is maybe the one person I will watch him in anything.
I agree. And he's in a lot of movies I don't like.
Vice.
He's obsessed with being in bad movies recently.
Actually.
Right. He's not had a great run recently, but I'm like, I do always
like he's been challenged.
Find him interesting. And I do think he is a guy who is to a certain degree now just taken as a given for a guy who had such a hard time for a long time carving out his space. Now it's like, Christian Bale's good. And I'm like, he's always doing weird shit. And oftentimes in service of bad movies.
He's almost like there's a bit of the Adam Driver thing going on with him,
Yeah, but I think he is, if not more transformative, more flexible than Driver, who is such a specific, energy and presence in all of this. What I do find interesting, paralleling out to Henry Thomas, who has also had, I love a lot of his work as an adult.
His career as an adult, but obviously not a Christian Bale type career.
Yes. And it's also one of those cases where you hear about the making of that movie, and there's a certain degree of this kid just being like an intuitive, emotionally intelligent, natural, and Spielberg creating the right framework for him and Drew Barrymore. And Drew Barrymore, someone who obviously has a major career, but you're like, this is a movie of like a little girl who's good on camera, and then later when she becomes an adult movie star, that's a different thing, right? Henry Thomas, I
feel
like,
to go through the tortures of the damned.
Totally. And I feel like Henry Thomas goes through a bit of a wilderness phase where what he's settled into as adult actor is very different than who he was as a child. What is fascinating about watching this movie is it is just like Muppet Babies Christian Bale. You're like, this is the exact actor he still is today. As much as he talks about like having a difficult time making it, a thing I love about
it's just tough to be a teenager making a movie. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's the classic sort of child star pipeline where there was a lot of like his parents pushed him into it and he was like expected to sort of help support the household and all this sort of stuff. And he had to go through a cycle of learning to love it himself. And a thing I love about Bale is that he always talks about that he like deflates the idea of his sort of self-serious methodness. And he always just frames it as like, look, this is a thing I did when I was a kid. I had to go through an arc towards like respecting it as an adult because it kind of came to me naturally. For me, I just need to put that much into it to feel like I'm actually doing a serious job and not doing something that feels frivolous. Like he's like, it's my own justification of not being lazy about this in a way. But you just feel that sort of intensity in this. Obviously, in this film, I think it's a lot more makeup, but it's like when the second half you have the time jump and suddenly you're dealing with like gaunt, haunted Bale. You're like, this is what we're used to. Bale shows up and he's lost 100 pounds and his eyes are dead, you know? And he has that, like, he's got the looks and the feelings and like, it is the first version of what, if he has any default mode as a movie star, the pieces of it are in this from the get-go.
I agree with you. I think, right. It's grown up Bale. It's, what's the best analog for this? He doesn't play a lot of like sweet, relatable people anymore.
I mean, my quiet favorite performance of his is The New World.
I love him in The New World.
Which I think is one of the all-time great normal guy performances.
From him.
Right. But also it's like, it's a character who fundamentally exists to come in at the end and be like, hey, I am relatively uncomplicated.
Right. That's a movie with my favorite actor giving maybe his best performance.
Colin.
Yeah.
I was going to make a joke. Why?
Why? I mean,
it's Ben Chaplin.
Is he in that?
He is in it. He is in
I
it.
forgot.
I'm pretty sure he was on set for like 6 months and winds up in like 30 seconds.
There are a lot of incredible. Yeah.
Got any corn? I'll see you later.
I believe he basically gets decapitated at some point. What was I going to say about Bale? Oh, when you were talking about Bale's experiences with this, it sounds almost a bit like what Jeff Bridges went through. Like Jeff Bridges went through this period after, I mean, he had actually like been nominated for an Oscar and stuff, but he actually was ready to quit.
Kieran Culkin's been talking about this too on his awards trail of like, I started doing this when I was 4. I never really felt like I had agency in that decision. It came to me naturally. And because of that, I kind of didn't take it seriously. And it wasn't until Succession that he was like, fuck, I think I actually want to be an actor for the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah. No, that is, I mean, with child actors, that's the thing. And especially with child actors who come from an acting family or to whom it comes. I mean, Jeff Bridges' whole thing was like, this was like the family profession. And I lucked into it and I was easy around it. It worked. And obviously he does like Last Picture Show and stuff. But then he was like, I want to do something else. Like this is like, I feel weirdly worthless.
I think, right, because it's like, I think they feel like I'm playing pretend and people are like lauding me and now I'm growing up and that feels childish. If I was good at doing it when I was 10, how can it be serious?
I bet Joaquin Phoenix has a story like this too. Like I wouldn't be so, I mean, he's, you also just, he's a guy much like Bale who the angst just exudes off.
Very complicated relationship to the thing he's good at.
And his methody shit is kind of similar, even though he's not good at articulating it in the same way as Bale, but it's just like, right. And Bale also has like a weird sort of like family structure in childhood. Like both of his parents were huge personalities without being actors in the film industry themselves. Yeah.
I hope he's good this year in The Bride, which is his only upcoming project. But it does kind of feel like the kind of thing where he could just lay it on really, really thick and, be fun, but, maybe. Anyway.
Do you know what's an interesting thing that I think about a fair amount? I remember some interview with Kathleen Kennedy a couple years ago where they're probably talking about how Star Wars was good and normal and no one was complaining about anything. And she brought up how much she loved Ford versus Ferrari.
Sure.
She obviously worked on this film.
Right.
And said, like, that is the closest to the real Christian I have ever seen on screen. She was like, he's so good at that. Obviously, he's doing things as an actor, but she was like, that is the closest to his personality. That is his most revealing performance.
He's really good in that movie.
But that feeling of being so good at something and kind of fighting against it,
That might be why, because Mangold, obviously, when he gets the call to do the Indiana Jones movie, I asked him like, why do you think they called you? And he's like, I think it was because of Ford versus Ferrari.
Yeah, Kennedy loves them.
So they shoot this film in China, as discussed, 21-day shoot in China, which was completely unheard of back then. And it was really complicated. The most complicated thing being they couldn't process film there. So they shot everything without access to dailies, which is insane to consider.
And especially for Spielberg, I'm sure that felt scary to lose that part of the process.
Right. Basically, they would have had to ship the film off, get it processed in America, shipped back through customs, maybe get access
You're
to
getting
the
dailies 2 weeks later at great expense.
One thing I remember hearing this years ago, and I don't even know how it would have worked, but I believe sometime in the 80s, Technicolor sold all its labs to China. So maybe it was, this film isn't shot in Technicolor, so that wouldn't have been an issue. But
was this when Ron Perlman bought Technicolor? Is he still on Technicolor?
I don't know.
I'm speaking of Hellboy.
This was a long time ago.
Billionaire Ron Perlman, owner of Revlon.
But and there was speculation at the time of the fifth generation filmmakers of why those films were so vivid color wise was because they had all these Technicolor labs. I'm probably sort of misremembering history here, but
let's talk about the film Empire of the Sun, set during World War II, during Japan's invasion of China. Jim Graham,
slightly more thoughtfully than the way he depicts it in 1941.
The same day as Pearl Harbor.
It happened on December 7th?
I believe it's the same day as Pearl Harbor.
That's interesting. Yeah, certainly it was pretty much concurrent. Obviously, Japan had been mucking around in China for decades and, invades Manchuria in the early 30s and all that. But Jim Graham he's a British boy, right? These are British expats living in the Shanghai International Settlement because Britain, basically during the Opium Wars, and I am not an expert on all this stuff, was just kind of we just get to have stuff here now. And China was like, what? And they were like, this is ours right here, and our boats go here, and we're going to build some fucking schools and shit. And that's just what Britain used to do. And post Pearl Harbor, Japan invades, and they just don't get out in time, right? That's the sort of early part of the movie.
But you're starting from the perspective of these kind of oblivious, out of touch colonizers in a country that is now being attacked that they feel ownership of. But now the actual rightful sort of citizens are fuck you most of all. It is a movie that starts with kind of immediately dismantling these characters.
Yes, and I think there's the scene with the where they're at the dinner party where the guy is kind of basically saying you guys are just temporary here. You don't seem to understand that about you British, right? That's, they think that that the British Empire will last for another 1,000 years, I guess, is sort of the vibe, the innocuous vibe, but not innocuous is the word I'm looking for. Passive.
Oblivious.
Oblivious.
Yeah. But also, the Bale character's relationship to what, from his perspective, feels like his homeland because it's where he's being raised.
Right.
He's never been to England.
But also,
he's this perfect little English boy singing choral music and, in his uniform.
The version of China he lives in is a weird bubble that is disconnected from the reality of China. And from the get-go, even just that choral sequence, you're cutting back and forth between him fighting the resistance to muck around, right? His schoolmaster or whatever conducting the orchestra and telling him to focus up, and then cutting to the reaction shots of Chinese citizens in the pews who are what are we fucking doing here? What are we watching here? Why are we being forced to engage with this?
How much do you know about early 20th century Chinese history?
Weirdly, we studied we studied Chinese history in middle school.
Okay.
I don't remember a lot of it, but
Boxer Rebellion,
the Sun Yat-sen's revolution, Chiang Kai-shek, and then the Long March. I remember all this stuff. I haven't looked into it recently, but I remember I was, especially during this period, because we'd studied Chinese history by the time 87 rolls around and I see this movie and The Last Emperor. So when I watched The Last Emperor, I knew exactly kind of the context in which it was taking place.
And you're watching it at a time when Red China, this sort of block is suddenly opening up a little bit to the Western world and whatever.
Yeah. It's opening up. I remember there was this there was this kind of almost iconic time cover of Deng Xiaoping and like opening up China, and so yeah, I mean, I have I had some familiarity with the history at the time, but not as much familiarity with World War II history. Interestingly enough, I mean, through osmosis, you learn about things from movies and stuff. And this is actually a thing I'm going through with my son now, because I mean, he's 15, he's a sophomore in high school, but there's so much just like basic American history and world history that he hasn't been taught.
I don't know what you're talking about. We are really good at teaching our own history in an honest and unvarnished way to our youngest and most vulnerable citizens.
We're not even good at teaching the sanitized version of it at this point.
No, you're right. Yeah.
But like, because now he watches some of these movies with me, and I'm like, do you know what World War II was about? And he only has like a vague idea. But then I'm like, well, had I studied World War II at this point? I don't know that I had at this age, but I'd seen Casablanca. I'd seen all these other, and obviously the Hollywood version of history is a monstrosity. It's not a thing you should ever use to teach anybody. But through osmosis, you kind of get this idea of what happened. Like my son is fascinated by presidential history, and I'm trying to explain Watergate to him these days. And I'm like, my wife keeps saying, "Oh, show him All the President's Men." And I'm like, you don't understand. All the President's Men is made for an audience that already knows what happened.
All the President's Men ends with like, and then Watergate. Like it doesn't. It's not about Watergate like unfolding in Congress.
Yeah, if you watch All the President's Men and you don't know what happened at Watergate, you will be completely lost. This is why we were watching The Post, because I was like, all right, The Post is a movie that actually does kind of explain what it's about. It doesn't explain Watergate, but it, the political stakes are explained in a kind of clear manner, so you can actually understand what's going on.
I mean, I always Nixon. Down with Nixon
or Dick.
I am going to show him Nixon. Actually, we're thinking maybe Dick might be the way to go for it. I want to show him Nixon too, but Nixon also like presupposes a lot of knowledge on the audience's part.
Dick is a good entry point and really accurate depiction of exactly how everything went down. I always gently mock my grandmother for this, but her favorite thing to say is, a war is really important, especially World War II, and no one ever talks about it. And I'm always like, what are you talking? It's the most talked about thing in global history. And yet, it's not like I'm having this realization for the first time. Most of my genuine understanding of World War II comes from me cobbling together the prism of depictions in movies and then being like, what of this is fake and what of this is real, and what's the real info I need to like tie together the accurate pieces.
I mean, our whole culture exists in the shadow of World War II.
Totally. In this way that is like very...
Understandably, to be clear. It was a world war.
It was
crazy.
A massive event in human
And it's not even that it's like abstracted in the media, but it's like it's stretched in so many weird ways,
and it's also one of those things that like I feel like very few Americans know about the Sino-Japanese War. And like you look at like, you just sort of like start delving into that. And it's like, 5 million dead, right? Like, and that's just like the Chinese theater, right? And it's like, no one even thinks about China in World War II. They think about like D-Day and like Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima and Nagasaki or whatever, like they don't even think about like, there was this tiny thin island invaded like the most giant country on earth, like for 15 years. Anyway,
right, which you can make the argument of like, why is like the biggest Hollywood sort of attempt to tackle that as a piece of this historic period told through the prism of a young British boy. But I also think that is the part of the movie that is Spielberg really trying to work through something, which is this character coming to realize where he stands in relation to this thing, which is especially interesting coming right after Color Purple, where he's going through this whole thought process of like, am I the guy to tell this story? But that is him just trying to put himself in the headspace of a person he can't really directly relate to an experience.
He's not really the guy to tell the Color Purple story, I would say. He's more the guy to tell this story, but this is certainly a story where like the Japanese characters are entirely abstracted. Like there's no characters there really. The kid he makes friends with at the end a little bit.
Yeah. Who's kind of a conglomeration of various characters in
that
the
Ballard
novel.
encountered, or Ballard's fictional alter ego encountered. And like, I do watch this knowing he's going to make Schindler's List, being like, it's interesting that he finally did kind of maybe have that moment of like, maybe I should make a movie that more personally relates to my history. versus like Steven Spielberg will dramatize the invasion, the fall of Shanghai.
He's using the history almost allegorically to his own inner sort of life in this film versus Schindler. And the reason why it is the one that finally connects with everyone of like, congratulations, you did it. You made a grown-up movie, is that he's like pulling from something that is like a cultural trauma that feels personal to him.
Oh yeah. And he has to go through the gauntlet of this movie to be able to make.
I think that's right.
Yeah. But there's
this movie's very good. In my opinion, very, very good.
There's stuff just in the first 20 minutes where you're just like, he is like really taking the scalpel to himself of like this kid in his backyard setting a toy plane on fire and like whirling around and smiling. His like smile when he sees the submarine out his window rising, like all of this is fun. Look, it's like the movies, you know?
And I think a lot of critics at the time, or a number of critics at the time, like misunderstood that.
Yeah.
Because they saw this stuff and they thought, oh, it's just Spielberg being
Right.
Spielberg.
Why
I
is there
remember
whimsy?
somebody saying something along the lines of, when will Steven Spielberg give up making movies about children on bicycles? And I was like, did you happen to notice what he's riding the bike through? You know,
totally. And it's like, it feels very like not cynical, but very like, yeah, self-critical is the word I keep coming back to. I mean, you have that moment where he's standing in front of the giant Gone with the Wind poster, right? And we talked about that when he was meeting with Alice Walker on Color Purple.
Yes, he offhandedly told Alice Walker, like, well, Gone with the Wind is one of my favorite movies. And she like wrote in her diary later, like, note to self, talk to Steven Spielberg about that horrible opinion.
And presumably had some long talk with him explaining why he couldn't make Color Purple in that image. And then just like on his following movie, he sets this scene where this little boy is being like, I need to stay in one place. My chauffeur's going to come to pick me up in one day. And people are like yelling at him, trying to figure out like his actual value as like basically an object
As
and a
loot.
commodity. Yeah. There's just like shit like that. And even just like him playing pretend in a like husk of a plane on the ground while wearing a Halloween costume or a party costume of a different cultural identity that he is taking on that is interrupted by actual troops coming up from behind the hill and acting like war for real. And the movie takes like 45 minutes to actually disabuse this kid of like, no, you're living through something horrible. None of this is fun. You are no longer protected. All of your like creature comforts were an illusion. And it's like collapsing. He still is just like, well, I'm rich. And I'm not American, I'm English, and these things mean something, and eventually all of this will come back to me.
And it's interesting how at the camp, so many of the other characters are trying to do that as well. They're trying to sort of maintain appearances, maintain some sense of
Malkovich's "you gotta watch after my stuff" thing. Right, that's the whole thing. That, like, not to jump way ahead, but Bale going to his bedside to talk to him emotionally while he's recovered from his injury. And they have this wonderful scene. After 5 minutes, he's like, wait, you said you were going to watch my fucking stuff. Malkovich's pile of junk is like symbolically all he still has.
So, right. Malkovich, we don't really know who Basie is except for like some expat who is already probably something of a hustler before the fall of Shanghai, right?
In the novel, he's a plane steward.
Interesting.
Okay. I believe in the film they changed it to a ship steward. It's offhanded mention, but it's funny because he seems like such a badass. I mean, you see, he's basically the picture of that image on the cover of that comic book that he has, with his hat and his sunglasses and stuff. And that moment when, I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but that moment when Basie is beaten and his hat falls off and you see that he's totally bald, which is a moment of such vulnerability. He doesn't seem like a stud in that moment.
That's why Malkovich is such good casting, because he is kind of unique, but he is also already, right, this kind of odd, balding, like sort of, he could already play the Vulture for Sam Raimi if he wanted to.
And he should have. I feel like the Malkovich superpower is the creepy calm, right? Where you're just like, why is this guy so quiet and unrushed and patient? And that can be equally well applied to having him play a menacing character or an endearing character. But in either case, you're just like, his energy's a little odd in relation to everything else that's going on.
How many endearing characters has
Very
he played?
few.
I mean, of Mice and Men.
Yeah.
Sort of. Obviously, sort of like a character tinged with, some menace.
I
suppose,
put a performance of his, I think, is fairly underrated in a movie I don't really like that I know you've come around on. I think he's very good in Changeling, and that is a movie where it's surprising how much he is actually a figure of warmth in an otherwise hostile world.
Yeah. I mean, his character in The Sheltering Sky,
I've never seen that.
That is a movie where you see his floppy penis, right?
you do see his floppy penis.
I remember that very clearly because I watched that movie on the BBC.
You see his Malkovich?
You sure do. Like, you know, as a young cinephile being like, oh, well, this Bertolucci movie is being shown on the BBC. And I just remember his floppy penis very, very vividly.
A lot of floppy penises in Bertolucci movies. But yeah, his character there is, I mean, tender isn't the word I would use, but you know, you really feel for him, or at least I do.
When he's playing villainous, the tenderness is the thing that makes it more interesting.
Well, yes, that's
and when
the thing
he's
about In the Line of Fire.
It's the creepiness that makes him a little more
interesting.
interesting.
That's the thing about In the Line of Fire is that you ultimately feel really bad for this guy.
Yes.
I mean, even though he's a total psycho.
The Hater Weekend Update impression where I feel like he describes it as like, I'm getting angry. I'm going to do a calm, bizarrely articulate rant, you know, like that kind of the Malkovich explainer thing. But the build even of just like, you know, you're watching like this kid's normal disappear, him in denial about it for a big chunk of the movie, him trying to like ride his bike like everything's normal. Like the kid still thinks he's in a Spielberg movie. He's ignoring what's around him, right? Then that Gone with the Wind scene where he's starting to like be seen as like, you know, and as loot, as an asset is what scares him. Pantoliano pulls him out of that. Pantoliano is the first person in the movie to be like, kid, shut the fuck up. You are annoying, right? A thing that I think is really the value of Bale being such a good actor, even at this young an age, is that he can play someone who's annoying and oblivious and not actually be fully infuriating to the audience. And yet, when Pantoliano says that, it's like so cathartic, where you're like, yeah, this kid needs to fucking calm down and get in touch with reality. And Pantoliano is like, Joey Pants, is like, you know, this force transitioning us to the next level of the movie. So then when he brings him to Malkovich, and it's like, oh, this is the real guy. And Malkovich is so much more calm and confident than like Motormouth Pants, who has been the guy telling Bale, you need to fucking calm down. And he does such a great Spielberg kind of introduction of like, you know, we're sort of seeing Malkovich in the foreground as Joey Pants brings Bale up. And you're just kind of hearing Malkovich do other stuff, his like body out of focus. And then he turns around, but for a big chunk of it, his head is down. You mostly see the hat. You can't see his mouth. Like he builds up the reveal in a way that makes him feel so important, as you said, as almost this sort of like two-fisted hero.
Yeah, and there's so much in Spielberg's early films, especially, you know, he's kind of a horror director at heart too, right? In terms, I mean, his you know, so much of his style is so well suited to horror, even though he doesn't do that much of it.
Made one, right? Yeah.
But Malkovich, the way he reveals Malkovich is almost like a character out of a horror movie.
No, you're right. It's the weird balance, and it's getting at the Malkovich persona, where he introduces him both like he's Jaws and like he's Indiana Jones, which similarly has the like Spielberg taking 5 minutes to show you Indiana Jones in pieces before you really get the hero shot, or 3 minutes, whatever it is.
And you don't, and like you said, I mean, we don't really know what Basie's ultimate aim is. You know, even when he's feeding Jim, it's kind of like, what's going on here?
He's being brought to this guy. This guy is immediately sort of presented as like, here's your new surrogate father, or at least this is your new family structure. And from the perspective of this child, it's like, I don't know whether to like valorize or like villainize this guy. You know, I don't know whether I should be afraid or comforted now.
He is probably just going to abandon him. He wants to sell him. He's probably going to abandon him, and then realizes he has, he's from a stately home. He's like, great, let's go to the stately home. Turns out the stately home is occupied by Japanese troops. That's the crazy sequence of the truck where they all start kind of like bashing the truck. And Pantoliano is like, it doesn't have a reverse. And they have to like go forward. And
is this the slap in the face sequence, or does that happen earlier?
Slap in the face.
When he goes back to the home and the sort of home staff, he's like bossing them around, and the woman just walks up and slaps him in the face and basically just silently says like,
Yeah,
That's not the structure of society anymore.
She's carrying a trunk with somebody. They're like walking down the stairs, and I don't remember what he says, but it is very much a kind of like, what's going on here? You know,
Make me breakfast sort of vibe.
And
Right.
he was being such a brat to her.
Yes.
He's
Oh,
a
yeah,
brat
absolutely.
film. So
He
I
is a
don't
brat.
feel necessarily in that moment very much empathy.
But I think this is all by design. Like, this is a movie that is like dismantling this kid and attacking his like weird kind of blinded naivete.
But he's a kid. I mean, he doesn't know any better.
I don't
really.
think
guess
it's
how old
villainizing
is he
him.
supposed to be? Like 12, maybe 11
I think
or
he
12?
ages from like 10 to 14.
Sure.
Or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
11
he
to
does
14.
light a plane on fire and is laughing, and she's chasing after him. Like,
Yeah, he's a little brat. Like,
Yeah.
that's exactly what he is. He's a little brat.
I think that's also one of the reasons why this film didn't quite hit the way I think they
he's
wanted
kind
to.
of not likable
Yeah,
in the
he's
way
not
that like
entirely
the ET kid
likable.
is.
That's
Right.
the thing. You're absolutely right. He's not, Spielberg doesn't make him full on annoying, or Spielberg and Bale don't make him full on annoying. But the idea is that we are a little alienated from this character. Even though we're
Even though
kind of
his
embodying
parents
his
are ripped
perspective.
from him, and it's so traumatic, and you're like, who could not sympathize with
But you
this
don't
or
put
whatever.
that scene in of the woman slapping him in the face unless that's the point of what you're going for, right? Which is like this kid coming back and being like, time to get back to normal. And then being like, this has all been like a fucked up societal lie that we no longer need to go along with.
Right, the bubble is gone.
Yeah. And when the character finally does become kind of relatable is when he's like hollowed out. It's when you do the time jump and you're like, this kid has just been beaten
Well,
down. He's
yeah,
in
it's
pure
very
survival
upsetting.
mode. Yeah.
But first they go to the sort of, it's not a camp, the processing kind of area, and where they're all getting put on the truck. And it's just, I think, again, very elegantly told from his perspective of like, he doesn't really know what the truck means, right? Like, he doesn't know where it's going. He doesn't really know if it's good or bad. That's very scary to watch as a parent when you're watching this movie.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And like, he doesn't even know if Basie is good or bad. Like, should he stick with him? Like, should he not? Like, no one's giving him like any guidance, obviously.
There's that part where they're in like I whatever that shelter is, and Basie says like, "Here, I got you a new pair of shoes."
It's
and
the Civilian Assembly Center. Yeah,
Right.
where he stole them from a dead body. And
Right,
he's like, I
and
don't want those shoes.
he's seen it, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's just trying to say to him like, "This is the reality of the world we live in. You need shoes. They will likely come off a dead child's body. You
Well, it's a
can't be
woman's
upset by
body.
this." Oh yes,
Yeah.
sorry, yes.
Yeah, very upsetting.
But like that, and also the scene where he's trying to resuscitate the woman.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a scene later where that's echoed later in the scene where he's trying to resuscitate the Japanese, the pilot, right? And that scene I've always loved because of the way, Spielberg allows the light to sort of shine through. I mean, it's beautifully shot. But that's, again, it's the kind of thing that in another Spielberg movie, this would have been ridiculous, but like he would have succeeded in bringing them back. I mean, so many Spielberg movies turn on like almost a reversal of history, like Close Encounters, all the dead, all the missing flyers come back.
Totally.
You know?
Yes. I mean, Justin
You
Chatwin
know.
at the end of War of the Worlds, the thing I cite all the time. Yeah.
Raiders of the Lost Ark, reverse Holocaust on the Nazis
Right.
at the end.
Right. But it's like first 30 minutes of this movie is like, here's a kid who like lives in a bubble and gets to like enact play scenarios, a safe version of war, and like giggles his way, all through it. And then there's like 30 minutes of him basically denying that his reality has changed. And then at like the hour mark, you have the sort of like Bale behind the barbed wire fence looking gaunt. Something has changed in this kid.
Right.
There is like a new normal. And even then, it still is him trying to fight it in these moments of like, I can bring someone back to life. I understand the stakes of the world I live in have changed. And the movie keeps, and just, the few Spielberg episodes that we have released at the time of this recording, a lot of the feedback has been like, it is fascinating to watch these early films, especially in a post-Fableman's world, and see how much early Spielberg is kind of about some amount of emasculation, right? And this is happening to a boy, but I do think there is this chunk of the movie past the first hour where he's like, I get it. I need to grow up. I need to become a man. And he is continuing to live in a delusion of him thinking that becoming a man and growing up means that he can sort of fix everything. And he is constantly kind of being reminded,
that
you're not
notion.
the center of the story. You're not the most important person. You're not in that level of power.
but he tries. He
He
tries
tries.
to kind of, he becomes kind of the conduit through which everybody starts to get their stuff. I mean, he almost runs the camp in a way.
Yes.
Or at least imagines himself running the camp.
And it's not a, like, he tries to make the best of it
Right.
thing. It's a, okay, I get it. I have responsibilities now. I'm going to do it really well. And yet he's constantly told, like, you don't get how this works.
Well, and that's the other thing about Spielberg, and something he's always been fascinated by is the idea of sort of trying to learn to live by the rules of a world you don't quite understand. And I mean, we see that obviously in a lot of the films, but later on during that period when he's making these kind of more socially important films like Amistad and Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan and Lincoln, so many of those films turn on the idea of, I mean, Amistad and Lincoln obviously turn on the idea of like people as property, right? And they all become about like sort of
Schindler's does too.
Yeah, I mean, they all become about sort of people as items on a ledger. Even Saving Private Ryan, the idea
Absolutely.
that
The
all
whole
these,
point of Saving Private Ryan is like, this makes no sense what we're doing objectively. This is a war where thousands of people are dying. Why the fuck would we commit any resources to this like lunatic, like, oh, he has brothers who died. Who cares?
But wouldn't it make a great narrative?
But also just like, isn't that what being a human and like what
Totally.
the point of this war is to like have humanity? Like,
Also, Warhorse is kind of this with a horse.
oh yeah, I love
fucking
Warhorse.
horse.
I struggle with Warhorse, but I'm feeling a
I
temptation
love
to give it
one
another spin.
portion of Warhorse so unambiguously,
The
the
Hiddleston?
Hiddleston, which
Yeah.
I think Hiddleston is just astonishing in the movie, and I think that whole, and I just, that's his understanding of World War I so well, where it's all these guys we're gonna rock this war, and then they charge into battle and are destroyed.
Right.
And
And
it's
my
like, this
my
is an
one
entirely
section
new war.
that I love is the Toby Kebbell horse, like the two men in no man's land meeting in the middle to save the horse.
The whole movie is a process by
That's
which
the one section I love.
by which kind of the old world understanding of war is
Pastoral,
replaced by the
Industrial,
the industrial
yes.
machinery of war, and it's just this process of just like more effective ways to destroy humans.
Absolutely.
My
problem with Warhorse is mostly the beginning where it's like, hey, is that horse for sale? And Peter Mullen being like, rah, 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 and you're just
But it
like,
has to be
shoot me
like that.
now.
It has to be like that so that the film can progress. And then the ending, everybody was always, I remember there were some reviews at the time saying, oh, it ends with like a, John Ford sunset, because it's like ending in red. And
I absolutely said that on our episode.
Oh,
of that.
did you
Yep.
say that? But
Yeah.
I'm
I'm not saying you're crediting me for that.
No.
But
I haven't.
I was
heard that.
one of the many people saying that.
But
yeah.
but it's like, well, I mean, a red John Ford sunset is a sign that something awful is about to happen.
You're not
it's a
wrong.
melancholy
Yeah,
thing,
I mean, it's very
not a
much. I mean,
thing.
you see that sunset in The Searchers right before everyone's massacred. So the idea that the film ends on that, it's not the Gone with the End. It's not the Gone with the Wind finale. It's the what comes next finale. But
Warhorse good.
Warhorse.
I guess. I don't know.
I should go back and listen to that episode.
It's a lot of us talking about how everyone in the movie wants to fuck the horse. That it feels like everyone relates to the
Nice.
horse.
You should listen
In a
to the
very
episode. It's a funny
sexual way.
episode. Well, they're just
That's
in
the
love with that
unspoken
goddamn
there.
horse. Including Spielberg.
horse there. David?
Yeah.
This is what brushing my teeth with an electric toothbrush used to sound like. It's like Lou Reed's Metal Machine music happening inside my head.
Very good.
This is what it sounds like now since I've switched to Quip.
Oh, that's so much more pleasant.
It's a lot less annoying.
You can harmonize with it.
So you're saying compared to other electric toothbrushes on the market, that Quip is a nice and quiet experience compared to the loud ones out there.
That's a great way of putting it, Ben.
Okay, so then try the Quip 360 and you'll never have to deal with metal machine music again.
Yeah, so why don't you get yourself Quip 360? It's an oscillating toothbrush, Griffin, that's literally going to revolve around you.
That's what I like.
I've been using Quip for a long time, but the 360 is the the kind of like round brush.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the whole thing with Quip. It's an electric toothbrush that doesn't overcomplicate the most basic daily ritual. I feel like Quip just exists to make this as easy as possible.
Very simple designs, ultra quiet, super clean, easy to maintain, and is scientifically, according to the American Dental Association, scientifically proven to remove up to 11 times more plaque between teeth compared to a manual toothbrush and provide up to 2 times more whitening on day 1. And if you don't like it, return it for free within 30 days.
It's fine. It's easy to travel with. It is convenient. It's easy to clean. And if you do love it, you can brush easy, knowing you get a free lifetime warranty for purchasing on GetQuip, that's QUIP.com, and the opportunity to subscribe to Refill Heads by mail every 3 months so you never have to go to the store. This is a part I like. That's the kind of thing I forget.
You don't have to go to the store. It just happens. They just send it to you.
It shows up and you go, oh, right,
I get
time
floss
to change.
too. I get a bunch of Quip stuff sent to me every, few months. It's really, really helpful. They've got 25,000 5-star reviews and, people love Quip.
And they got a perks program. I love perks programs.
You do love
Quip perks. Quip perks is a little hard to say. I'm going to say that's just for me. Quip puts their money where their mouth is. When you subscribe to AutoShip, you'll be enrolled in Quip perks to earn credit back over time.
Just for listeners of Blank Check, get 20% off site-wide and a free travel case and countertop stand at getquip.com/check. That's getquip.com/check.
Free your mouth today and save 20% site-wide plus a free travel case and countertop stand at GetQuip, QUIP.com/check.
Get Quip, QUIP.com/check. Quip.
As I was saying, this idea of, kind of learning to navigate the rules of a world that seems fundamentally kind of unjust or out of whack. You see that here. I mean, the idea of learning to sort of navigate the camp. Right, even though he's not aware of it, like I think we're aware of it as viewers, but as a character, I don't know that Jim is aware of it.
But the time jump is interesting in that we sort of jump ahead to the end of the war where he's, suddenly this much more gaunt, hollow kind of boy, but like he has now learned how to navigate the camp, and he has this like alliance with Dr. Rollins, the Nigel Havers character, who's like one of the most unambiguously good characters in the movie, and
it's an excellent performance.
It is excellent. I mean, he's
excellent.
that guy just gives you Englishman, so well. But then you've also got like Ben Stiller with the crazy teeth and Joey Pan, all
that
the
was,
little.
Seeing it at the Metrograph, that was a true jump scare moment where the audience just was like, am I hallucinating here?
It's crazy.
Which of course, this is one of this movie's greatest like lasting legacies, is that this is what inspires Tropic Thunder. Do you know this, Ben? That Stiller, this is like one of his first things ever. And he spends his time on this set. And he's like, it is ridiculous. The actors on set who are trying to be like, I need to like get myself into the suffering of the character. I need to like get in the boot camp, like post Platoon kind of like, I need to really go through the gauntlet, and being like, we're actors. We have trailers. There's craft services. You're never going to experience something as bad as being in proper war. And he holds on to that for 20 years to be like, I want to make a movie lampooning actors who are faking war and taking it seriously. And Tropic Thunder's directly from this.
I can see the inspiration for sure.
So it's just interesting that this is not a processy movie about like life, like building up these alliances or the sort of the way the environment develops. The environment is fully developed by the time we jump forward.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
And it's the end of the war, so it's about to fall apart.
I'm trying to remember if the book gets into. I mean, the book obviously gets into this stuff more. But yeah, I mean, the time jump is fascinating. Also because, I mean, it's always so hard casting kids in roles like this. It's like he looks different because he's gaunt, but he doesn't really age. Like
he's the right age. They figured it out. I think they sort of split the difference with whatever age he actually was, and kind of it works.
So so much of Jim's growth, he basically just has to convey through performance.
Yeah,
which is really
they found the right kid.
Yeah.
He was ready to handle it. I mean, here's my big post-Fableman's take on this movie, right?
Okay. When he sees the atom bomb, that's like Seth Rogen cucking his mom.
Yeah, exactly. When he sees Seth Rogen holding hands with the atom bomb.
Okay, go ahead. What's the take?
The sort of misread for many decades based on Spielberg's privacy over his family story, what was known publicly and what was held back until his parents passed away, and he mended his relationships with them, was the notion that like, oh, all these movies are just like him shattered in the wake of a divorce, right? That it's just like his family unit was broken and he never got over it. What I think first the Spielberg HBO documentary and then Fableman's really clarified is like, no, the core trauma of Spielberg's childhood, which is not on the scale of being a child in internment camp in World War II, but is the thing that emotionally rattled him, they never got over, is that he observes this thing, right, through filmmaking with his mother and his father's best friend. And in that is pulled into the world of adults. That his mother basically acknowledges, you share this secret with me now.
And now you have to kind of be an adult.
And now I'm like elevating you to basically being the third adult in this relationship, if not fourth adult in this relationship. And him having this disconnect from his siblings who are still sort of protected and being seen as children while he holds the information. And there is a 60 Minutes interview I keep citing that I pulled up and doing this series around the time of the release of Hook, and them asking him, like, why are you so fixated on childhood, fond memories? And he's like, I do not have a single happy memory of my childhood. And it's not like my childhood was sad once my parents split up. He was like, I felt sad and lonely and alienated my entire childhood. And then I was brought into the world of adults prematurely and was basically told, this is where you sit now, right? Which then accelerates Spielberg to this track of A, having this weird relationship with both the children and adults in his life, feeling neither fish nor fowl, and B, accelerating for him, like, I just have to focus on work. I'm going to learn my craft. I'm going to be the youngest person to get a deal at Universal. I'm going to show up on the backlot when I'm 17, right? I'm going to like will myself into being an adult faster, but then doing this thing that's high level pretend playing and like, toys and like giving a sense of control over the world that is false, that is illusory, but that he is able to sort of maintain. And him just being stuck in this space where it's like he keeps returning to childhood stuff, not because he's fixated on it, but because it was kind of pulled for him before he ever really got to have any handle on it, that he is trying to recapture something that he never really had. And I think the more success he has, the more it's like Spielberg has an office full of arcade machines and he's buying the rights to Casper and the Flintstones, is like, A, maybe these like superficial pop culture things were the only things that gave him some moment of happiness. But B, he's trying to like mend the child who never really got mended because it was like, hey, too bad, you're a grown-up now. Which is, in a much more extreme way, what this character in this movie is going through, and just keeps getting kind of knocked down over and over again every time he thinks, much like in this post-time jump, I got it. I figured out the camp. I'm in charge of everything. And he has
to save people. I can still
I'm a grown-up now.
Bring some morality.
Fair enough.
Place.
The world told me I need to be a grown-up now. I'm a little grown-up now.
And when the plane flies in, the Mustang, he still has the childlike excitement, when it comes in.
And as you're saying, like, Spielberg doesn't get mended until he resolves stuff with his father in the like Hook Last Crusader, which then opens him up to be able to make Schindler a different level of adult movie.
No, but make Hook his best movie about fatherhood.
Sure. But this is the movie where it feels like he's finally kind of identifying all of the issues, if that makes sense, in himself.
I think E.T. does have a lot of this too.
I agree.
Which we have not, for the listeners, is sort of the biggest psychological piece of Spielberg's puzzle, but we have yet to discuss it because we've been holding off on that episode.
I will.
But
you will have heard my
there is
ET
no
take by then.
roadmap to Spielberg's brain more than E.T.
I think these are very paired films.
Sure.
I do think they're like him sort of like at the front and end of the 80s, taking two stabs at a similar thing. And I think what's happened in the years in between is his own understanding of his own psychology has transformed a little bit. E.T. is, to me, the greater film. I think that is like his masterwork, period. But there's something really interesting in this as like a sort of dark twin to that.
Sure, that's interesting.
There's also this, what happens with his parents. How fascinating is it that cinema is the crucible through which all of this happens?
Whole fucking thing.
And also,
when he made The Fabelmans, I was like, "You crazy motherfucker! This has been on your mind the whole time."
He's like this anxious child who sees a movie that keeps him up at night, and the only way he can conquer that demon is to like replicate it and learn film craft. And then that becomes his undoing because he recognizes in footage the dissolution of his family.
Right.
It's just like
so the idea that within cinema there are dark corners that can destroy you.
Correct.
And this is a thing that I think
and also dark powers that makes the bully even angrier at you.
And this is, I think, a thing that animates his career, and also for a long time he's trying to avoid these dark corners. He can't avoid the dark corners.
Yes.
In fact, what's beautiful, I mean, we were talking about how he's kind of a horror filmmaker at heart, is sometimes you wonder, does he even realize that he's a horror filmmaker at heart?
And I've said this before in multiple episodes, I think there is a part of him that is genuinely scared by how effective he is at manipulating people's emotions through this medium.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That he can actually make people feel anything he wants, and that he just kind of has that innately in him, and that the movies of his that are criticized are often criticized for doing that too much. And it's not something he's doing strategically. It is something he has to work to fight against.
And I think in some ways it's why sometimes he errs on the side of sentiment or, syrupiness, because he is afraid of, the dark potential of cinema. So he kind of almost overcorrects sometimes.
Yeah.
It happens in Amistad.
It happens in Amistad. It happens in his endings as much as sometimes I defend some of his later movies, where people are like, why are there 3 endings to this movie? I do think that's sometimes him doing that. Being like, did you get it? You got it, right? I'll see you later. One more scene so that you got it. I mean, especially Lincoln, a movie I adore and I think is perfect. The ending is stupid.
I think that movie is great. I think the ending is exactly what prevents it from being perfect. Yeah.
Well, just when they're all like, there he goes, off to the play. We love you, Lincoln.
Yeah.
He's like, bye-bye.
And he loves the theater.
But by that point, I'm so invested
Me
in
too,
it that it's so
I love
moving.
I agree with you, but it is kind of crazy that, like, up until a point, all of his movies, we've been realizing this and focusing just on the first half of his career. All his movies up into a point are like, man, he gets out at just the right
this
time.
This movie is a perfect example.
He has the restraint
final
of
scene is so devastating, muted, I would say, right? Like not really laying it on too thick. Him just really, being reunited with his parents. And then it is truly like, goodbye. Like, hope you like the movie.
And there's a restraint of him being like, I don't need the coda. The audience knows I'm giving them the pieces and they can work out what the takeaway is.
And arguably, the climax of the film is that one Japanese soldier getting shot, which is such a kind of small, intimate, and uncomfortable little scene, which is not kind of a big. I mean, it's a war movie. You expect there to be some kind of big final sequence.
But the bombast is kind of often happening in the fringes or the background.
Nagasaki, 1,000 miles away being the most obvious example. That scene is crazy.
Like God taking a photograph, which, bring it back to the dark power of cinema. You know?
I think this movie rules. I think
it's really good.
I wonder what he thought of Oppenheimer.
Spielberg?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Has he talked much about
he doesn't really
Nolan
talk much about
at all? Because the thing that was interesting about him was that he laid it on so thick for Dune. And did the DGA sort of talk back with Villeneuve being like, this is the best sci-fi movie I've seen in years, right? Where and Villeneuve is kind of like a cousin to Nolan in terms of modern epic filmmakers or whatever. But yeah, have I ever heard Spielberg talk about?
I mean, I feel like I don't hear Spielberg talk about new movies that much, but I'm sure during award season.
I do feel like he tries to not put his foot on the gas too much in terms of he knows, whatever.
I'll say I Googled and the first result I got, and I think this was from the Nolan Villeneuve.
Yes, where Nolan says he sent.
When I first got the 70 millimeter print, I showed it to Steven Spielberg of Oppenheimer. He was the first person he showed. He had called me about something else. I just got the print as well, and I hadn't shown it to anyone. I mean, the studio had seen it, but we screened it for him on his own. I sat behind and watched him watch the film. It was an extraordinary experience.
It says he said some kind thing.
The other part of it, obviously, also is that
Spielberg was like, B+, I'll see you later, Chris.
That Interstellar was developed by Spielberg.
Yeah, that's right.
By Jonathan Nolan, and then he
for Spielberg
remains
possibly.
A producer, but I think mostly just because of his history tied on. I don't think he was
and also that initial Jonathan Nolan script for Interstellar is interesting, but is more Spielberg.
Very. It's him trying to write a Spielberg.
Yes.
And the beauty of Interstellar is that those Spielbergian elements are
that it's got the AI thing.
Yeah,
it's got the yep.
That's why it's Nolan's.
But it is interesting because you're right. They do overlap, and yet it doesn't feel like it is communicated loudly. And you sort of imagine that it feels like Spielberg should be publicly saying, he is obviously my heir apparent.
Spielberg,
we are doing events together.
Very different.
They are.
In some ways. And
very different sense.
I do feel like Spielberg, Scorsese, a lot of these kind of benevolent old timers who make great movies still should just once a year go on whatever Charlie Rose is now, not Charlie Rose, but whatever that is now, fucking Mark Maron, I don't care, and be like, here are the 8 movies this year I really loved. I guess Tarantino could do it too.
I mean, when I was on the set of the pilot for Vinyl, the worst thing that Martin Scorsese's ever directed,
possibly true,
by default.
There's an argument for like Shine a Light.
Never seen Shine a Light. I'll say maybe worst scripted thing.
Has the tide turned on Shine a Light? I did not like that movie at all.
I just think of Shine a Light as him in a little bit of his. I'm kind of like, Marty, there's nothing here. Yeah, like I like the Rolling Stones just as much as anyone, but like Rolling Stones in their late 60s, like there's nothing here.
I think Doc is a different category.
Anyway,
but anytime he would be around set, like sort of just like hanging out, and he would talk about movies and approachable, he would. And I would turn to my friend Ephraim Sykes, who was also on the show, and go like, I just want to ask him if he's seen like X, Y, and Z. I want to ask him what his top 3 movies of this year are. I want to ask if he likes Edge of Tomorrow. Like, what is he like in touch? What is he watching on TV?
He's seen Den of Thieves too.
All of it. I was just like, I want to know his opinion on everything and what he is engaging with and what he isn't. I agree with you that like the 10 movie brats who are still alive and are ostensibly now in old master positions,
right? Tell me
should
what
be
you
just
like.
They should be doing a fucking Soderbergh list every year.
Well, like Spielberg sees everything.
Of
I think.
course.
Some of these, a lot of Scorsese probably doesn't.
Coppola shares a lot of stuff on his Instagram
He
like
does.
films that he's seen and liked.
Yes.
And, it's actually very adorable.
But all of these
his
guys
Instagram
should
is
have
generally sort of adorable old man like.
Yeah.
Type.
I sincerely doubt it's actually him, but
no way. Right.
I want a podcast that's like the 5 of them once a week.
Paul Schrader,
What are you
like
watching?
goes to see every single goddamn movie.
Says
right?
normal things.
Paul Schrader yelled at me for making him go see All We Imagine Is Light. He didn't yell at me. He didn't yell.
He did not like
He
All We
emailed
Imagine
me. He's
Is
like,
Light.
why did you make me go see that?
But the email was in all caps.
Yeah.
Why didn't he like All We Imagine Is Light?
He didn't like. I mean,
It feels
feels
like
like
a
a different type of film for him, I guess.
It's got a little bit of whatever. What did he love this year, old Paulie S?
He's posted
I
about something.
know.
Oh, he really liked Conclave, I believe.
Oh, Conclave rocks.
He liked Honora, but he had that sort of gripe with Honora that she negotiates for so little.
He loved Twisters. That was.
Oh yeah, he went to see it in 4DX, right?
Yeah, I sat next to him.
That might kill him. We don't need him in 40.
No, he actually went to see it in 4DX.
Really?
All right, I take
Yes,
it back.
he posted about it on
Oh
Facebook.
my God.
He posts so much on Facebook. That's crazy.
Falyada he hated, right?
Did he?
He didn't even sit all the way through it. I
Right.
believe.
That's right. He walked out of it. Yeah.
Salute. Empire of the Sun. Are there any other sequences we want to talk about in Empire of the Sun, please, before we start wrapping up?
Miranda Richardson,
Very, very good.
wonderful actor.
Yes. Sort of
Interesting career.
I was about to say, this is kind of right when she's beginning to emerge, right?
Right.
And I feel like in the early 90s, Crying Game Damage is when she's kind of like has the most juice as like a big prestige actress.
Did she win Best Actress at Cannes for Dance with a Stranger? Did I imagine this?
You did imagine that. That's her first big movie, the Mike Newell movie.
Did she win anything?
Mike
for it?
Newell won the Award of the Youth at the Cannes Film
maybe
Festival.
that's what I'm
She won
thinking.
Best Actress at the Evening Standard Awards, which
Okay,
like,
all right.
no offense to them. Right?
Award of the Youth. That's like the Cannes Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards.
Exactly. It's a big French blimp.
They slime whoever.
Yeah, did Jacques Audiard get slimed? He's actually the MC.
He has to do an
'Cause
interview with Stick Stickley.
It's like coming up, like Crying Game is her big sort of breakout, and she wins some critic awards, and then like Damage and Tom and Viv are when she's getting Oscar noms, and then she
Did she
kind
have
of
3 Oscar noms? 3
just
supporting?
2, just the 2.
Crying
'cause she
Game and
didn't get
It
Crying
is
Game.
Did you
fascinating.
get
that-
Crying Game?
No,
It is fascinating that she is the poster for the Crying Game.
Yes,
Of
well,
all
because
the
it's such an
characters in that
image.
movie-
Her
I
in
know
that
it is.
wig.
I know, but of all the characters in that movie, that she is the one on the poster.
I think
Crying Game is the movie that I think so many people who've only seen the poster turn it on and they're like, Forrest Whitaker is like the lead of this? No one told me Forrest Whitaker was in this movie. He's doing an Irish accent.
that's a movie where like the cultural reputation, the memeing of it has morphed into something very different than what it actually is to watch it.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
I don't remember one of the, every 2-year New York different theater does a semi-complete Robert Altman retrospective. And every time those happen, I try to go see some of my blind spots. But one of them may be at MoMA like 10 years ago or at MoMI or somewhere. I went to see Atlantic City, which I'd never seen before. And there was one of those
you mean Kansas
I'm
City.
sorry, Kansas City.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Very different.
And a very different movie. I apologize.
And a film that's much harder to like watch.
Correct. Now finally
I think
has a
it
good
is a
Blu-ray.
disc.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
at the time didn't. And it was one of those great like rep screening things where like a new audience of strangers all has the same response to a movie in the moment and is kind of buzzing from it. Or I forget who I saw it with, but I was just like, holy shit, the Miranda Richardson performance in this. How did she not win everything? And then I heard like 10 other groups of people all saying that, like just kind of blown away. And you realize, even though that movie sort of had like more of a push for Jennifer Jason Leigh and for Belafonte, particularly in terms of awards.
It's also was not a successful film.
No, was disliked. The movie's pretty excellent, in my opinion. But also, like, that's the moment when she's kind of cresting in the 90s and she's almost getting taken for granted. And then she's become such a weird kind of like diffuse figure since then, where she never has totally disappeared.
No, she's a very, very good working actor. She'll
just pop up and you'll be like, oh, right, Miranda Richardson's incredible.
She's amazing in The Lost Prince, which I think is one of the like triumphs of British television. The Stephen Polyakov miniseries, The Lost Prince. Has anyone seen it?
No. I've not seen it.
Highly recommend. Have you ever seen any Stephen Polyakov? He is a guy who does not have a reputation in America at all, and is.
I know the name. What are the?
Well, he hasn't done a lot of movies. Like the movies he made were like Hidden City and Close My Eyes in the early 90s and stuff like that. He's a big
Close
British,
My Eyes, I saw it.
with Clive Owen, young Clive Owen, like, but a big British TV, like, you know, director. And his best things are Shooting the Past, Perfect Strangers, which I think had a different title here because of the sitcom. It was called Almost Strangers here. And The Lost Prince, which is like this sort of triptych about like memory and stuff. And I highly recommend all of them to anyone, but they're hard to find, I think. But The Lost Prince is the easiest to find because it like won an Emmy and is about the youngest son of King George V, who had epilepsy and was hidden away from the public and died very young.
I think I heard about this.
And she plays Queen Mary. She plays his mother, and she's astonishing in it. It's so good.
She's such a good actor, and this is a movie where you see what she can do because she doesn't have a lot of screen time.
No, she doesn't, and you barely understand sort of like who she is. She's so, the camera loves her. Like she's so beguiling and sort of mysterious, and
she has like translucent skin.
Yes,
I mean, it's such a
British.
You know, she's a very and there's something very otherworldly about her whole presence in the film. So much so that when she dies
in the movie,
it's yes, in the movie. When she dies, it really does feel like suddenly she becomes real in that moment. You know,
like she's like as a corpse more earthly.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, and I don't know if there are any other. I mean, Leslie Phillips as Maxton, like he's a British legend. He's very good. He's like a big carry-on guy.
Obviously, Miranda Richardson's best performance is Mrs. Tweedy in Chicken Run. I just think that needs to be stated. In Chicken Run,
she's the villain,
Mrs. Tweedy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Still haven't seen. Should show it to my daughter.
Oh,
because she liked the Wallace and Gromits.
Yeah. You know what movie sucks? Chicken Run 2: Dawn of the Nugget.
But how do you feel about the new Wallace, which I haven't seen?
Liked it.
What's it called again?
It is called.
It's got the chicken guy.
Murder
back.
Most Foul.
Yeah, there you go.
I will say basically all the Feathers McGraw stuff is great.
That character just
he pops.
Undeniable.
He pops.
Love
and it's just
guy.
You get the juice from like he hasn't been on screen in 25, 30 years.
His penguin ass.
He's great. Let me say this, he gives an incredible performance.
You know what's so funny in The Wrong Trousers? Whenever he has a gun, it's just this little penguin suddenly produces like a sort of human-sized revolver.
It's basically funny anytime he interacts with any object. And Murder Most Foul knows that, and it gets a lot of mileage out of that.
Boy, oh boy.
It is incredible for how much people talk about like, oh, it's amazing that Aardman gets such a great performance out of Gromit and he doesn't even have a mouth. It's just his brow. And then Feathers McGraw doesn't even have a brow.
No.
He's got a beak that
Two
doesn't
beady
open
eyes.
and two beady eyes.
And a little round head.
Yes, and it's truly just tilting the head that gives him characterization. I think that film is in a weird space between feature and short.
Sure, it's like 60 minutes long or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It's a little padded for a short without having enough space to make a denser narrative as a feature. It's also like the first post, what's his name? Peter Sallis.
Oh, right. He's dead. Right. The voice of Wallace.
So it's Ben Whitehead did it, who did a very good job.
Right. But it's
and
not
Nick
quite.
Park directed it, but he co-directed it and he didn't write it. And there's a little bit of a feeling of like sequel from other people. Have you seen the new Wallace and Gromit?
I have not. I've heard it's fantastic.
Yeah, Allison loved it.
I think it is solid. I will say without like preloading a thing, my complaint about it is I think they fail to, and they you can tell they realize this at the end because they try to retrofit one. They fail to make the plot, the sort of like Indiana Jones-esque MacGuffin of what they're up against, directly relate to Wallace and Gromit's relationship.
Sure, which is usually
watching
the crux,
it, that is the crux, is the parallel of like the device that goes wrong, but really it reveals something about how these two relate to each other, and Wallace's sort of ignorance about what Gromit means to him and needing to learn that. They like kind of tack it on at the end, and you're like, it sort of hasn't been that up until this point. I still think it is better than most things.
I really want to see it. My son is at that age when he watches most movies with me. And, but also he's like, a busy young man going to school with homework and stuff like that. So there's so many films where I'm like, oh, I need to watch this.
For movies.
I should wait until he can watch it with me. And, so it's like,
so you're waiting to watch that one with him.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, there's a lot of movies where I'm like, oh God, I should probably watch this for work, but
yeah. It is much better than Dawn of the Nugget, which I think is basically wall-to-wall bullshit.
Oh, the chicken run.
Yeah, it sucks and it's for losers.
Because Gibson's not in it, so you think,
because
of woke.
And here's the problem: they bumped him because of woke, and they replaced him with some clean-cut, uncontroversial figure. Let me check my notes here: Zachary Levi.
Oh boy,
that's the funniest part, is that they were like, okay, who's like a safer choice than Gibson?
Empire of the Sun was given a plum Christmas release, awardsy sort of release, December 11th, 1987. It made only $22 million. It is the lowest grossing Spielberg film at that point, except for Sugarland Express. And I think Spielberg did not think it was going to be like a blockbuster, but was a little taken aback by how sort of tepid the general reaction was. Saris loved it. Hoberman thought it sucked.
Hoberman not the biggest Spielberg fan.
No, and Hoberman called it the sorrow and the pity remade as Oliver, which is pretty funny.
Ebert really struggled with it, talked about that he thinks like the first 30, 40 minutes to hour is really strong, and then he's like, and then it becomes like this kid playing games in the middle of a war with John Malkovich. I don't understand what he's getting at, which I feel like is the way a lot of people talked about this, that it's like, oh, he can't get over the childlike wonder thing.
Pauline Kael gave it the review. I feel like she gave a lot of his movies at this point where she's like, it's majestically made. I don't really know what it's about or if there's anything going on here.
This was the standard line on Spielberg from a lot of kind of the high-end critics at the time,
Spielberg, says fuck you to the critics, in this way of like, basically like, stop trying to tell me what kind of movie I should make, which I think is what the critics would often do. Like they would often be kind of like, stop trying to win an Oscar, stop trying to make a serious movie, go make the movies you're good at, But then he would make those and they'd be like, aha, this kiddie bullshit.
It's how we do, David.
It is how we do, but it's especially how they did. I mean, God bless the critical community of the 80s or whatever, but they were some snarky folks.
Yes.
And like, as Critic Circle chair, I went on a deep dive because it used to be like, we didn't tweet out our winners, right? The chair would just call like the New York Times or whoever and be like, all right, here's who won. And especially if the chair was someone like Pauline Kael or Rex Reed, they would also sprinkle in a little bit of spice in terms of like, we got in a big fight about this, and there's just a contentiousness to those days that there is not in our room when we vote. Really.
And I think it was a smaller group. I mean,
a much smaller group, and they're meeting at the Algonquin and they're getting drunk.
Right. And I'm not even thinking specifically of the New York Film Critics, but like the critical community is a smaller group.
These like newspaper critics.
And it's factionalized.
Yes.
Right. Yes. I mean, we talk about the Paulettes and stuff like that. I mean, people will always talk about like, Pauline Kael would be like, all right, this is the movie we're getting behind. And, I mean, it wasn't sinister in that way. It was like,
it was cliquey is what you're saying.
It was cliquey.
Yeah.
And we still do it, but less in a kind of overt cliquey way. It's just, there are sensibilities that sort of gravitate towards each other. And I remember from the days of like Cinemasters and stuff like that, there'd be certain films that like, obviously all these people are going to hate this, like everybody hates Lost in Translation. And it was like, you step out into the real world where people actually seem to really like a movie like Lost in Translation. But like my little pointy head friends were like, nope, and that happened with Spielberg a lot.
Let's also call out with Spielberg. There is this thing, and I think there are versions of this that still happen today. I think Nolan is sort of a version of this where it's like, hey, you know what? For better or worse, the kind of health of American films and the studio, like film as a commercial industry, kind of rests on your whims.
Right.
And there is this sense of like, you have a responsibility, which then turns into people saying, you should be doing this instead of that. Why can't you evolve into this? This sort of like push and pull of like, there's a health of this as a business that you're responsible for, but also if you have everyone's ears and eyes, shouldn't you be using that to try to elevate understanding and the art form and whatever? And it's impossible to please everyone in those positions. I also think, like when we come back and do new release Spielberg movies, which we've done over the last 7 years, he and Shyamalan are the two people who have made the most films since we've covered
Putting them out.
Right. And very often people think that we're insane for liking Shyamalan movies more than most people do. And a lot of the Spielberg new releases we've covered, I have come off as like tepid to mixed on, right? And people will go like, why is he willing to forgive all of Shyamalan's like clear weaknesses and yet he's more critical on Spielberg? And I do think it is me falling into the same thing, which is like basically outside of Ready Player One, which I also will rewatch. I like all of his modern movies, but I'm like rating them against the Steven Spielberg canon. And every time I sit down to see a new Steven Spielberg, I'm like, is this going to be the best movie ever made? It is hard not to go in preloaded with some version of that. And in this era, it's the most extreme version of that because I think it is this bifurcation between like half the time he makes the most culturally impactful blockbusters, and then sometimes he wastes his energy trying to impress us that he is a grown-up so he can win a fucking Oscar. And I think people were really, really cynical about that. As much as they were also criticizing for him for like infantilizing culture, they were even more critical when he tried to like wear a suit and play grown-up. It's a weird thing.
Which is also why Catch Me If You Can is one of his greatest movies.
Totally.
Because
I agree.
that more than Fabelman's to
Yes.
me is like the autobiography.
Right. But it's like Schindler finally shakes that off of him where people are like, you can do whatever you want and we will judge it on its own merits. Maybe we hold you to a high standard, but whatever. You've proven yourself. You're in the room. You're settled.
It's Schindler, but I really think it's Saving Private Ryan because after, obviously Schindler wins him the Oscar and wins him so much respect, but then he makes Amistad and Lost World, which everyone is kind of like, eh. And then he makes Saving Private Ryan and everyone is like, you are now the poet laureate of boomers. Like, that's it. You did it.
I think there's the other part of it, which is like Schindler is...
And I love Saving Private Ryan, to be clear.
Yes. Saving Private Ryan is, in my opinion, the single biggest shift in his signature style up until that point, which then goes like, oh, he can now change languages, which then you get like Minority Report, Munich, and all these films that are very different than the usual Spielberg thing. That's like, to our earlier point of like giving someone a second Oscar. It's like Schindler's like, this is the best you've ever made a grown-up movie. And then Saving Private Ryan is, we didn't know you could do that. And once he's proven he could do that, people are like, you can do anything.
Yeah. Saving Private Ryan to me is, my response to Saving Private Ryan is actually not dissimilar to some people's response to Empire of the Sun, where I'm like, first 30, 40 minutes, obviously, incredible. And then the rest is kind of like, I like it. I don't dislike it. That's another movie we're going to rewatch with my son so he knows what the hell D-Day was.
Well, there's no better fucking movie to watch. I hate to sound like the weirdest thing especially is like I was shown Schindler's List, Amistad, and Saving Private Ryan in high school. All of those movies are inappropriate to be shown in a high school, like, on a sort of like paper thing, right? But like, but they're wrong.
Yeah.
And like,
and they're incredible communications of, right.
So speaking of World War II history, I have a little thing to share here.
I have no idea where this is going.
So my grandfather is a veteran of World War II.
Is he still alive? No,
he's passed.
Right. Okay.
He was a Marine.
Sure. My grandpa was in the Air Force.
He thankfully was really good at typing. And so he was assigned to someone in leadership and never really ended up having to
He was like way back. Right. Sure.
Yeah, I think he spent most of his time, he always talked about just being like stationed at a large base in Samoa.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Just like acting as a secretary. I don't remember their rank, but with someone in leadership.
My grandfather booked Talent for USO shows, which I've said before sounds like a bit.
Griffin Newman shit in the world.
He could not have been more dissimilar from me in personality, and yet when I say that, people just picture me with a helmet.
my
being like, hey, let's get some stand-ups.
My maternal grandpa was in the Air Force. He was in France, but I think he was not like on whatever the front line either. He did a lot of like, but he was in France. I mean, I don't know. But anyway, carry on.
And so my dad, when he was cleaning out the house, which is a family house. And so a lot of times he'll discover stuff that my grandparents left at this house.
Has been in your family for like 100 years, correct? Close to?
It was a cabin that was built in 1880 and has been in my family since.
Wait, so way more than 100 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Pretty crazy. He discovered this Japanese flag, which was, I'm going to totally not be able to pronounce the name of this properly. Yoshigaki Hinomaru. But when Japanese soldiers were drafted into service, their family and friends would sign this.
Say good luck flag.
This
is what you're
flag.
referring to. Yes, it would look like this. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So my dad discovered a flag, and we don't think it's from my grandpa. We think it's from a relative. But we found this really cool nonprofit called Oban Society, who is set up where they reconnect the flags with the family members, and we sent the flag in
Wow.
to Japan, to find the person
When was
this
this?
belonged to.
So we just sent it in the mail and got confirmation truly like a few days ago.
That is
wow.
fascinating. So it was
That's
essentially
awesome.
they found this whoever found this flag and took it home, being like, "This is crazy." Right.
And it's like, in America, the flags were popular as badges of victory, often given to mothers, sisters, or town mayors. I just found that weird. Why
Very
would you
weird.
give that to your mayor?
Mayor's like, another fucking flag. What the hell?
I mean, the person it belonged to probably died
Almost certainly.
in the war. And
Likely, yeah.
So this would go back. I mean, but that's
fascinating.
Yeah,
That
is that
it's
cool?
fascinating that exists. That there's like a service that finds, reconnects these artifacts.
It's awesome. I think it's great.
Interesting. My dad, my grandpa, I have a giant bag of his shit from the war, but it's all like weird money and like the weird stuff that was given to servicemen of like, here's how to like behave in Britain or in France.
Yeah.
Of like, the cultures might seem strange to you, like, do you GI from New York City or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
That is fascinating. Yeah.
My dad's dad was he's like one of those in the middle guys. Like he was
Too young for
of
one,
sort of service
too old
age
for
in
the
between
other.
the two
Yeah,
world wars.
yeah,
And my dad was born in 1941. His first memories, of course, were being bombed, as he would tell me as a child.
That stuck with him.
Well, honestly, his first memories were like his sister taking him into the shelter. Like,
Wild.
right,
Yeah.
yes, 100%. And then his real memories are like post-war Britain of like rationing and like all that shit, We all grew up with these stories being told to us, and Bilge is right that like the next generation, right, they're like, yes, the story is told to me by Steven Spielberg.
Right.
in a
They're
movie.
a little disconnected.
Right.
Yeah.
It's harder to be like, now I feel like I'll tell my daughter like, oh yeah, did you know your great grandpa like was in France and it'll just sound like science fiction, right?
Yeah.
Like it's sort of, yeah.
Sounds like you're begging for another world war almost, David. Like you're just
Take it easy.
And we should just mention we're watching this movie. We're seeing this internment camp.
Yes.
Just a reminder, America did that to Japanese citizens.
Japanese American citizens.
Yes.
Yep.
Sorry,
But
Japanese American
Japan
citizens.
did not cover itself in glory in World War II, certainly.
no, it's just a whole mess of a situation. World War II, a
Good
real
take. Well, one of my favorite
Knotty
pieces
issue.
of literature, very cornily, is Haruki Murakami's The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I don't know if anyone's ever read it. Have you ever read it?
no.
Which is a book about Japan's ignorance. It's not a book. I mean, mostly it's a book about a weird, horny guy who doesn't know what's going on, which is what all his books
which
are
all
about.
his books
Who like listens to jazz and is like, I can't find my cat. But it's really a book about Japan's ignorance of the atrocities it carried out in China. Which, like, as you read the book, you realize, like, well, this is a book written in the 90s, and he's like, basically, he's trying to be like, we still don't talk about this. And like, it's such a trauma that like it's buried in our collective unconsciousness. And it's fascinating to see, that's how I learned about that from a goddamn like fiction book.
Right. And like, remember Come See the Paradise, the Alan Parker movie about the Japanese internment camps? I mean, that was,
What's that? That's Dennis Quaid, right?
Dennis Quaid. Yeah.
That's another movie with one
Noted
of the,
Hollywood liberal Dennis Quaid.
one of the most used scores in other trailers.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yes.
The Randy Edelman score. But like, that's a movie that came out in America, and America was like, we don't want to think about like Japanese internment. Like, we don't want to think about it. Like, sorry, we're not showing up for that.
But very much a kind of, mainstream
Yeah,
American
Tony,
studio
right,
release. Like, you're going to learn about history from this.
Right. A homework movie. I mean,
homework
that's
movie,
you know,
which is
like
what they
that's
call
my
them,
joke about that movie that Ray finds as Odysseus or whatever. What's it called? The Return.
The Return.
That movie was created by the British government as homework.
Yeah, but I kind of really want to see it. Have you seen
I got no beef with
I reviewed it.
It just feels like a movie where the British government was like, we decree that a new homework movie be made this year.
Okay, but here's the counterpoint. The sell on that movie is also, what if Ray Fiennes was fucking ripped?
He's ripped.
He is ripped. And
What if he
he's
was
very good in the
ripped
movie
and he had nothing to lose?
and traumatized?
Yeah.
But it was funny though when Nolan announced that he was doing the Odyssey and people were like, "Oh, what the hell is the Odyssey?" And it's like, what a
There's
diss
an
on
Odyssey
that
movie
movie
this
that is like
year.
literally in
I know.
Nobody
theaters.
cares.
Yeah.
Empire of the Sun got many technical 6 Oscar nominations, but none above the line, as they say. The nominees for Best Picture that year are The Last Emperor, Broadcast News, Fatal Attraction, which is the big box office movie, obviously, Moonstruck, which rules, and Hope and Glory in what one might imagine is the Empire of the Sun slot.
I gotta say, that's a nicely rounded 5.
I think it's a very solid
the best
5.
5, but there's a good balance of
It's a
shit
good
there.
year for movies. Full Metal Jacket also comes out that year. Another movie that kind of is underperforms in a way. I
would say
it
so,
does okay.
if people are too hyped for it and people are kind of like underwhelmed by it at the time, that's a movie year that, in my opinion, is transformatively good because all those movies are good, but it's also the year of Raising Arizona. So it's like the Coens exploding.
Mhm.
It's the year of a little movie about a little metal guy with a heart of gold, RoboCop.
I mean, the great American film made by a Dutchman.
It's also the year of like Evil Dead 2. Like, and so it's like a lot of these like young, hungry future kind of like, whatever poet laureates of American cinema like emerging.
And
But
that
also,
was no. So I was going to say, I mean, I have told this story many times. It's entirely possible I've told it here on this podcast too. But Raising Arizona is my gateway into like heavy duty cinephilia, because I had gotten into the habit of just like going to the movies after school. And Raising Arizona, I went to see Raising Arizona in the theater. I come home, and obviously it's Raising Arizona. I mean, what 14-year-old doesn't love Raising Arizona? And then I come home, and we had a issue of Film Comment with Raising Arizona on the cover. And I was like, oh, it's interesting. I'll read through this. And I'm reading it. And somewhere there's an essay in it called Praising Arizona. And it's just a kind of an article about how great Raising Arizona is. Yeah. Somewhere in it, they mention that the self-conscious style of the Coens is not unlike the self-conscious style of Bernardo Bertolucci in The Conformist.
I mean, this is
we happen to have a VHS of The Conformist lying there. This is like
so the tools were there for you.
Yeah, everything was there.
It was literally all on the table.
Yeah, like my parents are like off at work. I'm a latchkey kid.
But you're able to like sort of connect the chain links at this moment. Yeah,
I take the VHS of The Conformist. I watch it that day, and I'm just like, or that night, and I'm just like, I don't know what the hell this movie's about, but it's so gorgeous. I rewind it, I watch it again twice in one day.
Right.
And by the end of the week, I've watched it like 6 or 7 times. And I become obsessed with The Conformist, which then leads to Italian cinema, Bertolucci, and then Last Emperor comes out later that year, as I mentioned.
And then that's right.
But yeah, like Raising Arizona is such an important movie for me in that sense.
No, that rules. I mean, not to be overly sentimental about, but I'm just like thinking about that Oscar field and the other things buzzing around here, right? You have like some of the greatest examples of genre cinema ever, like the highest level of genre filmmaking made by like emerging
You've
filmmakers.
also got like Carpenter's Prince of Darkness.
Totally.
Yeah.
But then like even just the films they're awarding, there is a balance of like commercial entertainments that they are respecting and respected movies that now are being elevated to commercial entertainment through the Oscars, where you're like, the public was seeing all these movies. And like the Academy wasn't too snobby to like acknowledge Fatal Attraction, but also could like kind of anoint films and still be like, if this gets nominated, the public will see it. They'll go.
And there was a little controversy at the time because of because The Last Emperor was not released wide because it had been greenlit under a different studio head for Columbia, right? I think it was Putnam had been running Columbia, right? And then was it Don Steele came in. And so there was this kind of, they didn't want to spend a lot of money, focusing on the stuff from the old regime. I think Hope and Glory was also Columbia, maybe. But but there was
Yes, it was.
so
You awarded a movie that the public actually doesn't have any relationship to.
right,
Yeah.
and there was actually, I think it might have been at the Golden Globes or at the Oscars, but one of the producers or somebody involved in Last Emperor was just like, now please release this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was in limited release.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Good Morning Vietnam that year.
I believe that is the last time Sony Columbia won Best Picture.
That might be true. I
think
did a deep dive on that.
They have a
once, and it's
long run. I think
fascinating.
that was the
Right.
last time.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Every once in a while, they come close and
Wild to consider. Yeah.
The
Social
box office
Network.
that week,
Yeah.
Griffin, December 11th, 1987. It's opening at number 9 at the box office on 225 screens. So, not a super wide release. Number 1 that week is a film I think we will one day cover. It is a black comedy. It's the directorial debut of its director and star,
Is it Throw Mama from the Train?
Danny DeVito and Billy Crystal in Throw Mama from the Train.
DeVito come up a lot in this miniseries box office game. It's his era.
He was around.
Yeah.
A very funny, good movie.
the Bradley Cooper of his day.
And I do
In
think
so many ways.
we will cover him one day.
We will. As Sarah Rubin said, short series for a little man.
Yes. Number 2 at the box office is, I think, the highest grossing movie of the year.
Of 87.
If not highest, it's the biggest American hit of the year or whatever. It's a comedy, family comedy with a crazy premise.
It is 3 Men and a Baby.
Right.
Yeah. It was the highest grossing American film of the year.
Based on a French film, of course.
Directed by Leonard Nimoy.
Directed by Leonard Nimoy. Goots, Danson, Selleck.
Just
They have a baby.
By the
kind
way,
of-
actors directing.
Yeah.
That's right. Another example.
But that's like a thing that actually just wouldn't make sense to like a budding cinephile now who's trying to understand like culturally the decades before them, where you're like, there was an era where the highest grossing film of the year could be handily outgrossing blockbusters and sequels.
Right. Just like what
Spock
if three
directing
fuck-ups had a baby.
2 TV
Right.
stars and a middling comedy star in a very simple comedy
it was a
premise.
Juggernaut. That movie was a
Huge.
juggernaut.
Because everyone could see it was a 4-quadrant movie, as they say.
And those
Yeah,
big,
all
big,
3 quadrants. The 3 men and a baby.
Number 3, opening new this week, is a film that you're kind of like, well, why wasn't that nominated for Best Picture? It was such a generational movie. It made a lot of money and it won Best Actor that year. And then you watch it and you're like, oh, because it's bad.
It's not bad.
It's pretty bad.
Are we talking about Wall Street?
We sure are.
I-
Oliver Stone's Wall Street. A very enjoyable movie that Michael Douglas is fantastic in.
Not only
but
didn't
it's a bit obvious, even by old Ollie's standards.
It is definitely
it's a bit
obvious.
on the nose.
So I think
His follow-up to Platoon. It was 1 year later.
I know, and that's another case where people had very high expectations for that movie.
in
Think
between his 2 Best Director wins.
Yeah, he also made talk radio
Oh,
after
sure.
this.
Okay.
But yes, pretty much. Yeah.
Wall Street. I remember at the time I was not a fan of Wall Street, and
No,
then
it's a
over the
shitty
years,
movie.
Wall Street has become. Wall Street and Any Given Sunday are the 2 Oliver Stone movies I rewatch the most.
Any Given Sunday is a movie I will admit that at the time when I was a teenager, I was kind of like, this is a bit much. And now I kind of have a quiet appreciation.
Yeah, it's
for
like
it.
Wall Street is kind of like that for me. It's such a great popcorn movie.
Not only was
but
Wall
it is
Street
not, you're
It's
expecting
not
the guy,
too
he makes
intellectual.
Salvador, he makes Platoon.
Yeah.
and then
Right,
Wall Street
right.
is just kind of like,
it's a little bit of an indication of where things are going to go prematurely in his career.
And then he,
No, then he
Talk
drills
Radio-
back down, but then you
Right.
catch up to all his movies kind of become Wall Street.
Yeah, it's kind of like you kind of were always this director, weren't
Right.
you? Yeah.
He's had a little hack in him.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, not only not nominated for Best Picture, but it wins Best Actor, and that is its lone nomination.
I believe that's
It
right.
is a weird, like that movie was a big hit. It wins such a major award for such a major star. It was just blanked in every other
And
category.
he's also the star of Fatal Attraction, which is Best Picture
Oh
nominee.
my God, what a year!
it's a hot year for
big
Michael
year for-
Douglas playing really relatable, chill dudes. Number 4 at the box office is a great comedy.
A great comedy.
Probably cover this guy one day too.
We'll probably cover this guy one day too.
The director.
The director. It's a great comedy. Is it? It's not Tootsie. No, because
No.
that would have been nominated for Best Picture and everything. That's
I don't
earlier.
like- I don't like Tootsie.
Tootsie's in the ET year. Yeah, Tootsie's. I mean, I have a lot of
This is
respect.
a movie you love.
This
It's
is
a
a
movie
movie-
Ben loves, I'm sure. It's
Is
a
it Planes, Trains?
Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Hell yes.
Yeah, the movie that
I
should
love
have won
that
Best
movie.
Actor this year.
For Candy. Candy's pretty amazing in it. Great
You know
movie.
what? I didn't think to watch it for this holiday season. It's something I try to
The classic
revisit.
Thanksgiving movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles?
I do. We just got the 4K of it.
Hell yeah.
It's a weird transfer. I don't know if you
I
put it in.
I haven't watched the 4K
It's
yet.
a weird transfer.
Uh-oh. They
Yeah.
AI Steve Martin?
They did a little bit of
Oh, boy.
upscale and smoothing.
Oh gosh.
But
those
the
fuckers.
thing is, on there is the like hour of fabled deleted scenes that for so long were a rumor that are like, because there was always this like there's
John
a mythical
Hughes
3-hour cut of the film.
Yeah.
And then his children finally opened the vault and they were like, look, there was never like a functional 3-hour cut. He just had so much good footage of Candy and Martin that his first assembly, he tried to use all of it and then he correctly whittled it down. Everything he cut out should not be in the movie. But as just raw footage of Martin and Candy, it is unbelievable.
But that's the thing. I feel like that's usually the case when people talk. Oh, there was originally a 6-hour cut. I'm like, I'm sure most of that was just assembly.
Right. Yes. Assembly needs to be used more often
And
in describing these things.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Number 5 at the box office is the other biggest hit of the year. We've mentioned it a bunch of times. It's nominated for Best Picture.
Fatal Attraction.
Fatal Attraction. Which is a pretty good movie. It's pretty silly too. The roller coaster scene rocks.
It is funny how Adrian Lyne has become kind of a sort of retroactively inserted into the pantheon.
Well, imagine beaming through a time machine to 1993 and sitting down with the New York Film Critics Circle and being like, Sliver is going to get like critical attention and care. Like
I bought the new
so
4K.
did I. Well, Beatrice wrote an essay in it and I wanted to read it.
We were talking about this in our news and
I
deals
saw
thread.
that movie.
How
I
much are you
hated
willing to
that
spend on a
And
Sliver
I love
4K?
you, Beatrice, and I'm excited to rewatch Sliver, but Sliver fucking sucks.
It's terrible.
But it's fun.
Terrible.
Yeah.
But I was like, I have to have this.
Yeah, me too.
But
I
here's
bought
the
it.
thing, like even at
We're
the
so
time,
sick.
Adrian
Something
Lyne
wrong with
movies
us.
were getting nominated for Best Picture.
I know.
They were. Well,
Right?
that one was.
While
Yeah.
also being seen as like from the critics of like that's the Academying, and yet
There was always kind of like one weird, like, okay, this was a hit, and like
Totally.
this was a little
That's
too sleazy.
Duffer
if
Cat.
if there
Yeah.
were 4 Slivers coming out in wide release a year, we'd be doing cartwheels. We'd be I'm not just saying 4 Fatal Attractions, 4 Slivers, and we'd be in Hong heaven. I was gonna say hog heaven.
We've also got The Running Man, which is being remade this year.
Yeah.
It's an okay movie, a movie I've never loved.
I was gonna say that's a perfect example of a movie that should be remade.
I
where
want to
you're
love
like,
that movie.
I'm
It's
excited
enough
that-
of a weird adaptation that there's a room to do a different one.
and the original is not very
It's
good.
It's
not very
perfect.
good. It's just a
It's
cool
got
premise.
some stickiness. Yeah.
I mean, I want to. Paul Michael Glaser is one of those guys where I'm like, I really want to like his movies because of the man background, the Miami Vice stuff, and every time I watch one of them, I'm like, he just didn't quite have it.
Kazam. He directed Kazam, among other things. We've got a re-release of Cinderella, a film I've now seen 400 billion times. My daughter is obsessed with Cinderella. Cinderella.
Is that her favorite of the princess, or at least
It's
the classic?
kind of the only princess one she's
Okay.
locked in with, I would say. She's not gotten to Snow White or Sleeping Beauty. Is there another one I'm missing? Those are the sort of big princess movies, right? And Cinderella is the most classic princess one of them all because it's mostly about being friends with mice. That movie is like 80% mice. But then it's just, about like vibing in a party.
Well, that's the wild thing about Sleeping Beauty is like 95% fairy
Yes.
aunts.
Well, Sleeping Beauty is so
I
incredible.
mean, it's gorgeous.
It's
Did you
so
see
beautiful.
that 70 millimeter print they showed?
No, I
Wow.
wish I had.
I-
I would love to
I
see that
saw-
movie.
I don't think I've
adapted.
ever seen a movie look that good.
It's
on
such a
screen. It looked ridiculous.
astonishingly
Right.
beautiful.
They
movie.
got amazing access to the 70 millimeter print that's rarely shown. And
Yeah, they bring it out once every 7 years. or
right.
something.
And they ran at the Museum of Moving Image in Queens a couple times. And I went to see it. And there was a father who brought a daughter, probably around your daughter's age, David, between 3 and 5. And at some point in the movie, she like asked him a logic question, as kids do during children's films.
Right. And everyone was like, shh.
So like one guy scolded her so hard, and
Really?
everyone in the theater was like, let's step back
Right.
and
Everyone
think
relax.
about what we're
Right.
seeing Sleeping Beauty at 11 a.m. on a Sunday.
Exactly. We're not allowed to wait
This
in
is
here.
for her more than it is for
Yeah, yeah.
us. Everyone chill the fuck out. But it
It's very
became
much
people
we are
yelling at
living
the
in
guy
her
for
world.
yelling at
She
the
is not
kid.
living in
Yeah,
our world.
yeah.
100%.
It was just really funny.
Right. If you bring your daughter to Miami Vice, at 10 p.m. and she's like, so wait, where does Jose Hierro get off? And then you can shush her.
Yeah.
8 is Nuts, the Barbra Streisand, Richard Dreyfuss film Nuts,
Which I
about
keep
pleasant people.
Promising to see and still
I
haven't
like that
watched.
movie.
Yeah?
I haven't
I've
seen
never
it in
seen
a
it.
long time.
That's a
but I-
classic to me. I'm at I'm at the rental store, and I'm like, "What is this?" I just take it off the shelf.
Leslie Nielsen's final dramatic role. That is the last time he did drama.
He wasn't. Yeah. Number 9, Empire of the Sun, and number 10, one of the best movies in 1987, and one of my favorite movies, Dirty Dancing.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
God, another
goddamn classic. And another movie that was dismissed by critics, and now I watch it, and I'm like, again, I wish there were 5 of these a year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about Dirty Dancing.
I like Dirty Dancing.
Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily nominate it for Best Picture.
No, I don't think
I enjoyed it at the time.
My 5 for 87 are Broadcast News, Raising Arizona, Moonstruck, RoboCop, Made-a-Wan. I mean,
Made to Wan,
the John Sayles movie.
Two of my 10 favorite movies of all time are released in this year, and a couple others that are really close.
When Jason Bailey does that podcast, a very good year. I did 87. I don't remember which movies. I mean, obviously, I'm sure we discussed Last Emperor, but I think we discussed Walker actually.
Yeah,
but
incredible year.
Yeah, I mean, other movies, Hellraiser, Ishtar, Maurice, the James Avery movie.
Oh my God! Yes,
Predator is 1987. Near Dark is
and
1987.
RoboCop.
Yeah,
God.
I'm like, there's at least 5 of my top 25 in 87.
Yeah, we didn't know how good we had it.
Yeah,
no, we didn't.
We used to be a proper country.
Bilge, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Bilge, we've already gone long, but I have to say this, and I asked you before we recorded if we could talk about this, and I do feel like there was a responsibility to our listeners. You have seen Horizon, an American Saga, Part 2.
I have.
You are in the limited pool of people who have seen it.
It did premiere at Venice.
It did. It's not a 10-person pool, but it is limited. We are here now 6 months plus from when our mini-series on Costner ended with us saying, hey, and next week, Horizon Chapter 2 in American Saga. We thought that episode would come out the following week, and the movie still is, at the time of this recording, no closer to being released. It has had another sort of a third wind from being put up on Netflix and being the number 1 movie on Netflix, after being the number 1 movie on Max and being the number 1 movie on VOD when it went to all of those places. Unsurprisingly, his audience has shown up in the homebound ways that people assumed would happen, and yet it feels totally stagnant. And I just feel like I would be remiss if we did not allow you to talk at least briefly about the film you have seen that we're all dying to see in our unresolved mini.
I think it's a really great movie. It is actually quite different, I felt, from Horizon Part 1. Less of a spectacle. This one focused more on the women, and in fact, Ella Hunt.
Yes.
She's kind of the protagonist.
I mean, that was my favorite narrative thread in the first one.
And this one is so much darker than the first one.
Oh, cool. The first one wasn't exactly a barrel of laughs.
No, but this one is really dark.
There's a scene where Luke Wilson rips someone's heart out of their chest. Make a joke about Temple of Doom being the darker.
What's interesting is that the things you thought about a lot of the characters in Horizon 1, you start to think differently about them. So he's kind of playing off that.
This is what I want out of this idea of the experiment.
Right. And one of the reasons why I put Horizon Part 1 on my top 10 list for the year. And in fact, in my mind, I'm putting the two of them together, but really it's like, and as much as I liked Horizon Part 1, actually Part 2 made me think about Part 1 a little differently. I think it's great. So Costner was at the screening that I was at. It was kind of a private screening.
The least intimidating man in the world.
The least intimidating man in the world. And
kind of a wallflower. It just disappears.
And I asked him beforehand. I said, so is it, like, have you shot Part 3 or, because I was curious, like how far along he is in just shooting the stuff. And he's like, oh no, I still have to shoot Part 3 and 4. And he said, I'm looking for a studio. And then I don't even know if I'm supposed to say this, but
if you need to cut it out, we'll cut it out later.
So Part 2 ends much like Part 1 does, with like a montage of scenes from the next Horizon.
Which, from what I understand, that's basically what he shot for Part 3. That he had said previously that he had done like 7 days of filming on Part 3, but it's basically that stuff.
So afterwards, I saw him again and I said, well, it looks like you shot some of Part 3. And he's like, yeah, I only shot enough so that I could have that montage.
Right.
And I was like, that's weirdly adorable to me.
Can you confirm to me? I feel like I had heard, or at least seen from other people who have seen it, that a lot of the sizzle reel stuff at the end of Part 1 is not really in Part 2 or not in that form. And that similarly, it was him being like, let me just get a taste of some stuff.
There's some stuff that I expected to see in Part 2.
Yeah.
That's not there based on what I'd seen in Part 1. Yeah. But I don't remember the specific things, but there were a couple of things where I'm like, I vaguely remember a shot of this happening. The stuff at the end of part 1 promises a very different film than what part 2 actually is. The thing,
How much Ribisi in the printing press do we get without spoiling anything?
very little.
Okay, so that's a great example of what you just said.
It's kind of building up to more of that.
He's the
stuff.
Thanos. He hasn't assembled all the Infinity Stones.
No,
it's happening.
It ends actually with more of him, and there is the sense that okay, now in part 3
he got his hands on some more ink. Now he's really going to be able to fly her.
What was I going to say? It is, it's such a. I mean, I love the movie. I love the project. It's such an interesting inflection point now because if he can't find a studio or if he can't find somebody to like allow him to make the rest of it, this thing is going to be, because it's an incomplete movie.
It is,
right? It doesn't end there. There's no there's no world in which you're like, all right, well, whatever. We got parts 1 and 2 and we'll just accept this. It's kind of like, no. Like the story isn't finished yet. And it's just going to exist as such a weird little entity if he can't finish it.
We're angry that when we did our part 1 episode, that so much of our talk was like, it's hard to talk about this because it's an incomplete object, right? And that we were sort of kicking the can on a certain degree of analysis. But it is. And it's like, it's incomplete, but in a way that's by design because part of his notion was like, make them simultaneously and release them close together. And we did this episode, and in like reality, we were like, it's going to be 6 weeks from when we're recording to when we see part 2 and do that. But in release schedule, they will be 1 week apart. So next week, you will hear our episode with a more complete take. And much like the reality of watching these movies, that didn't happen. And I find it fascinating that part 2 also does not give you like a clean cutoff point.
No.
But that's what I was looking for, is like a building sense of like the vision of where this is going.
And it's,
which is a little hard to pin down watching the first one alone.
It's also weird because, we are in the age of sort of the bifurcated blockbusters where everything's a part 1 or a part 2 or whatever. But those films do, even the ones that to me sometimes do feel incomplete, do feel like they have some narrative shape, some kind of narrative
arc. They try to have a mini arc so that there can be some sense of resolution at the cliffhanger part, even if there's a bigger threat.
Right.
And Horizon's refusal to do that,
not doing that,
I think is very off-putting in a way that's interesting.
Right. And a lot of people have said, understandably, why isn't this just a TV series? Because it does have that quality. And like, it's not a TV series because he wants it big, because it's a giant big screen Western. It's, I don't know. I mean, if he ever finishes it, it'll be like no other movie ever.
I agree. Now, just
big
wrap,
if.
Big if. An even bigger if than Krasinski got. That's a terrible joke. I want to end this episode by requesting. We've been lucky enough through various means to acquire a couple signed posters from directors of movies we have covered. We have hanging in the office an Ang Lee and Seamus Hulk, a Campion, Power the Dog, a Selleck, Wendell and Wild poster. I did win as a trivia prize at Nighthawk a Horizon poster. Now, we obviously can't get Costner to sign it, but Bilge, would you mind signing the Horizon poster and just writing, I have seen chapter 2?
Why are you doing this?
I think this is worth doing. I think an immortalization of attention. This is the end of the episode. I said it was the end of the episode. You're pointing at the clock. It's the end of the episode.
If
what are we doing?
This is funny and everyone's gonna like it.
You can sign it off mic.
But if you ever get poor Kevin Costner to sign your,
this is what I think is funny.
Who's this clown that signed
this
my
is
poster?
what I like. That's our clown. Bilge Ebiri is one of our finest. And
he put your movie on his top 10 list, you jerk. Yeah.
We will, we'll do the signing after we wrap up the episode.
I'm just going to, Bilge, do it on your own time here.
Maybe Ben should finish our episodes. We should just like.
I think this is worth doing. I think people are going to like it. And I think, in fact, the outrage at me doing it on mic is going to lend, it's going to add to the narrative.
Yes.
Because now it's a thing that needs to be resolved, much like Horizon and American Saga. Bilge, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Anything specific you want to plug?
When does this go up?
This will go up in March?
March 16th.
I just hope I'm still employed in March.
Hey. I'm always thrilled anytime a new piece gets published of any sort from you. It's always an exciting day. Always love to read what you write.
We'll link to your articles in the episode description.
Oh, there's a lot of them.
You can link to my writer page on Vulture.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
That's what I was talking about.
Okay, well then I'm stupid. I don't know. I'm
Oh my
thrown
God.
off by me.
End the episode. End it.
I want to. Maybe you should end it. Maybe you
Great.
think you're so good at ending episodes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's just then quickly shout out here at the end. We're in the midst of our March Madness tournament.
Oh, I suppose that's true.
So please get involved if you want to impact the
Rock the vote.
director.
Democracy and
If you're online, stay online.
If we're going to cover as well as
Pokemon, go to the March Madness poll.
participating on Patreon, where we'll be voting for various different franchises.
It's the Elite Eighters. It's you're voting on the past candidates who have gotten close but no cigar.
We also are currently in the midst of our Star Trek Picard era
Mhm.
commentary series.
We're
Coming
engaging
up
with those films.
is our Insurrection episode.
Mhm.
Yep. About the heroes of January 6th.
Just a few days ago, we put out a Spielberg bonus episode. We're covering his segment in the Twilight Zone movie as well.
Just that one.
As
Amazing stories.
Amazing
His
Stories.
amazing story segments. Yeah.
Anyway, just get some housekeeping out.
I know, appreciate it. And thank you all for listening. Tune in next week for Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, correct? Yeah. And as always, I think the poster thing was good and worth doing.
Blank Check with Griffin and David is hosted by Griffin Newman and David Sims. Our executive producer is me, Ben Hostley. Our creative producer is Marie Barty Salinas. And our associate producer is AJ McKeon. This show is mixed and edited by AJ McKeon and Alan Smithy. Research by JJ Birch. Our theme song is by Lane Montgomery and the Great American Novel, with additional music by Alex Mitchell. Artwork by Joe Bowen, Ollie Moss, and Pat Reynolds. Our production assistant is Minnick. Special thanks to David Cho, Jordan Fish, and Nate Patterson for their production help. Head over to blankcheckpod.com for links to all of the real nerdy shit. Join our Patreon, Blank Check Special Features, for exclusive franchise commentaries and bonus episodes. Follow us on social at Blank Check Pod. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, Checkbook, on Substack. This podcast is created and produced by Blank Check Productions.
In this montage, John Huston is getting an award for, I think, Sierra Madre?
I think so, yeah.
And in the introduction, and I forget already who's introducing him,
Yes.
but I think the critic, I think it's the critic is saying like, and what a rare and interesting phenomenon. He wrote and directed the film. Like, we really need to celebrate the unique artistry of a director who wrote his own movie. It's being treated like he's some savant. Like,
it's being treated like he invented the camera.
like, really? And because it was just
that
so
was
rare.
a big deal. That was
Yeah.
a big deal.
Yeah. Anyway.
Part of what gave rise to the auteur theory was, these directors who actually exerted more control beyond just directing the film.
And then it's Jack Huston just sucking our dick for 2 minutes, being like, "Oh, I think the New York critics shine a light on." It's great. He's so nice to us.
I was the person I was sitting with. I was like, "That's John Huston, right?" And he's like, "Is it? Doesn't sound like him." I'm like, "You have to remember, in our minds,
younger Jack Huston, right?
Yeah, in our minds, John Huston is still just like Chinatown, even though
Right.
we've seen him in a million other contexts.
But also in our minds, he sounds like the impressions of him.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Where you listen to Connery and you're like, it doesn't sound like him. And you're like, because it's Daryl Hammond Connery.
Right.
He doesn't sound like the bug in Men in Black.
right.
He was just middle-aged, Jack
Right.
Huston.
It's like watching young Michael Caine.
Yeah.
It's like
young Michael Caine. Now, that's a fine treat.
I know.
Oh,
So hot.
yeah.
We might as well just kick off the episode reminiscing on my
This is not how we kick
critic
off the
circle.
episode.
Oh, okay, fine. Well, we're recording it.
I know, but you put it at the end of the episode. Things must be done in proper order.
Or how about right in the middle? No
You wanna-
context.
You want
Throw it
to
right in.
you want to place it 15 minutes in to give people time to finish their dinner?
That
Yeah,
wouldn't
exactly.
make sense for The Empire of the Sun, because The Empire of the Sun is not a movie that's like, let's mess with like the formal, storytelling
No.
approach, really. Like, this is a pretty traditionally told film, I would say.
Okay, let me start.
Maybe so.
Let me
we can
start the
talk
show
about it.
properly.